All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to the class. So I'm Alex Seneschal, obviously, as you should know, I hope. And we're going to be doing hard science.
Okay, Alex, this is Oren
Last
again.
class.
Yeah, so
Yeah, and then
sorry
we'll
to
get,
interrupt.
yeah.
Your audio is good, and then it's kind of cuts out. You wouldn't by chance have another mic, maybe, or maybe use another USB port?
I don't think it's the mic.
Okay. Uh,
Um,
okay, we'll just keep going and see if it'll correct itself. Sometimes it does.
it
Sorry about
says it's got 3 bars now.
that. Okay.
All right. So yeah, on our next break, when we have a break about mid-class, I'll sort it out or try to. So yeah, like I was saying, I'm just going to give a quick overview of some stuff, and we're going to talk about the rough class outline, some of the homework we're hoping to do, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about the hard surface workflow and design, and then we're going to get into the class. So I just kind of wanted to give a framework that you can kind of base everything around. So in the last class, I started, and I'm going to show a lot of the process images in a bit, but so we made this gun. And from a really rough block out to the final model. And yeah, so we covered a lot of design stuff. We covered hard surface modeling, workflows, and there was also a lot of critique involved with that. So I'm going to actually show some of that in a little bit. But yeah, so in this class, I feel like if you guys want to follow along and do, a gun, or you want to do a prop, I'm going to be doing a gun, and the format is going to be more of a demo. But the reason for a demo is I'm going to talk a lot about design rules and design principles as well as modeling principles. And the reason why we're going to do a demo is so that I can show how I apply those, which I think is really the more challenging part of just design in general, kind of getting a handle of that. And we're going to also be giving a lot of critique. And during the class, if I were to say something that, like for example, let's say I use vocabulary that you don't know, like if I talk about plane changes and you're like, what's that? Feel free to speak up. There's no reason to really feel nervous speaking up. We're all here to learn. So yeah, like I said, feel free to speak up. Yeah, so if you guys would like, I'm gonna just kind of get into it and show how our last gun started and kind of talk about the hard surface workflows we're trying to develop during this class. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about design. So during the last class, we start usually with a very rough block out, something that helps you kind of get something on the page. And we start to refine it from there. And you'll see this whole process in real time, and I'll go over it with you guys. But so if you're here for just design, feel free to follow along in your program of choice. If you're here for hard surface modeling and design, or just one or the other, you know, I don't want you to feel like you have to do poly modeling, but if you want to do the hard surface stuff, I think this workflow is a very good one for getting you to be able to make complicated models. So over time, basically, we take this block out and we begin to refine the shapes. And so I believe this is by, sorry, got a message on the chat. But yeah, so basically what we do is we take a rough block out and we refine it slowly over time. And what this allows us to do is to kind of see the gun or the weapon or prop or really whatever we're making in a more iterative state and kind of make decisions. Hello?
Yes. Uh, you kind of cut out there a little bit, Alex. Can you hear me? Oh man. Alex, are you there?
Uh, I can hear you.
Okay. Is your screen resolution a bit high? I couldn't hear you if you responded. I don't know if it's. Oh no. Okay, so we just lost Alex.
It's a 2K. This is my lowest.
Oh, okay, okay. Says you're offline. Can you rotate your model or move? Yeah, we're just on a slide of a close up of the tip of your gun. Okay, we got a full screen of your gun, Alex.
Hi, can you hear me better now?
Yeah, yeah, yes.
All right. I took my wireless adapter and I put it on a USB extender.
Okay,
Sorry about that. Hopefully this help fixes the issue.
okay. Thank you.
All right. Yeah. So what was the last thing you guys heard? I don't want to miss anything. Apologies. I believe I was talking about just, okay, the blockout. So was I about here? All right. All right, thanks guys. So yeah, basically what we want to do is we want to just slowly, get to our end result, but we do it iteratively for the sake of being able to kind of judge the choices we're making. When you're designing in 3D, you have to make a lot of choices for pieces that kind of like go together, and when you're drawing or when you're making a 3D model that's already designed, you don't really have to do that. So when you're designing stuff that is in, very complex and in 3D, it's a longer process than just modeling it, right? Because you have to put a lot more thought into it. And so basically what staying in blockout does, the longer you stay, is it allows you to kind of make a lot more decisions, more planned out and thoughtfully, and allows you to design it with more freedom, right? One thing a lot of people kind of get into too early is they add bevels too early, or they add smoothing, or they add edge loops too early. And so these are things that we want to learn to avoid. They're very hard habits to break, especially starting out. And so I find that it's best that the more that you learn how to stay in blockout and plan the choices of design that you're going to make, the easier it makes your life. So that's pretty much the most important part of the workflow that I'm going to be going over and demonstrating, is just trying to stay in blockout longer. So as you can see with this gun, we take a lot of these pieces and we solve them over time. Where pieces connect is where things are most complicated. And that's why this workflow is so beneficial, because it allows you to really get the design in without polishing it just yet. And so then once you get to the end and you have it fully developed, it's so easy to just go in and add edge loops and details. And so that's basically what we're going to be covering in this class, as far as hard surface. And then as far as design, actually, before I go any further, do you guys have any questions about this? Anything you'd like to know? I don't want to get too ahead of myself. Just feel free to type in the chat anything you want to say. Any questions you guys have, anything at any time, just put them in the chat. All right, cool. So yeah, in the end product that we're going to have is a subdivided model. Should we follow along? David said, should we follow along with our own design, or should we follow your model? I would do your own design. If you're just trying to learn hard surface stuff and you don't care about the design aspect, like I was saying, feel free to model something from concept if you just want to learn how to model better. If you want to learn design and not really modeling, feel free to do it in ZBrush or draw it. It doesn't really matter to me. But I think just pick either doing 2D or 3D, and if you want to learn design and hard surface or both at the same time, I think you can kind of tailor it to wherever you want to grow. Aaron said, do you go from 2D or 3D? It depends. Sometimes I start with 2D, sometimes I start with 3D. I might do some paint overs to get started. We'll see. Just get some ideas out. And that's another good question, right? A lot of people ask that. So I would say if you feel more comfortable starting in 2D, because designing in 3D is actually, I think, a skill that takes a little while to learn. You know, if you feel comfortable with that and doing paint overs and that helps you get better, I would do that. If you feel just comfortable in 3D all the way, you know, do 3D. It's really up to you. So don't feel like there's any specific rules. Tam says, how can I apply 2D on the homework? Can I overpaint on the final render, or does the homework need to be 100% 3D? It's up to you. Like I said, you know, how you want to learn in this class is up to you. If you don't really care about making final high poly subdivided models and you just want to do the design, then yeah, then do whatever you want. Yeah, feel free. There's no rules. There's no limits to what you can do. I would say that if you want to make a gun, that's what I'm going to be doing. But if you feel like making a prop because a gun feels a bit too much of a large thing to tackle, then feel free doing a prop, or if you just want to. You know, there's no rules. So cool. At the end of the class, I'm going to have a subdivided model. Yeah, sorry. There's one other question. TJ said, do you ever get distracted or annoyed by the lack of detail in the blockout phase? I think it's funny that you say that, because I feel like a lot of people do, and I feel like I used to, and it basically, you can, yes. Like when you're first starting on something, like for example, you know, halfway through this prop, and if you've been looking at it for hours, right, you might be like, man, there's things that I don't like about it, and it's looking pretty rough. But we have to kind of, I think, realize over time is that, like, the stronger your blockout is, the stronger the final design. So instead of getting excited about all the details I'm going to add just yet, I try to get more excited about the overall shapes and forms and the big picture, because blocking out really is taking the big picture and then refining to smaller. So you need to be applying design theory and getting a cool design from the big picture all the way down to the small. And so I think as long as you're kind of focusing on that, the rest of it kind of falls into place over time, right? Do you think about functionality in the blockout phase or just the silhouettes? I think about a bit of everything. I usually will talk about what I'm thinking and why I'm making the choices, whether it's functional or aesthetic. I would say that there is a lot of both going on in the blockout phase. Like for example, during this one, you know, I'm thinking, what do these teeth do? Why is there suspended glass? And, you know, I'm thinking, okay, well, the teeth are emitting some kind of energy field that's going to focus the energy coming out of this main emitter. And then the main emitter is going to be firing stuff that gets that goes through here, gets refined through the glass plates, hits this glass plate at the front, builds up energy, and then fires out. And then I was also thinking, okay, well, I want to add this crocodile motif to the top of this. And so in my head, I'm, you know, thinking functionally, okay, well, what could these be, right? So I think it's important to think about both of them. You know, like this, for example, is a sensor area. This latch and the latch on the bottom take the top piece off. And then I was also thinking about, you know, this is the ammo or the battery canister, and then that gets removed. And so I'm just trying to balance form and function, right? I think that they're a relationship. Like, you don't want to not think about one and then think about the other. But I think that it's very important that you think about both. To what level you choose to think about functionality is kind of up to you. I think during this class, if you want to learn more about shapes and the abstract of design, which I'll talk about in a bit, I would focus only on function to the point of like intuitive function. Like when you pick up a gun, if the handle is too small, it's going to look silly, right? Or it's not going to work. Or if your safety's on the other side of the gun, you know. I think that during this class, if you want to learn the design portion of it, I would try and avoid stuff that's overly functional. And the reason that I say that is when you're trying to think about two things at once, it will make it harder to focus on learning one thing. And I think function is something that anyone can kind of learn on their own. So yeah, just a quick opinion on what I think is best for this class for homework is abstract, or a little bit more, less based in reality. So I think that, so Aaron says, do you try to put the gun with the human pose to see how it looks? Sometimes I'll use the 3ds Max biped, not all the time. It just depends, like for the last one I did, but not all the time, no. Although I do think it's important. And so I'm just going to quickly show the whole workflow again with a different gun. So I made this one in the middle of my last class. And basically we started out with a drawing, as you can see in this background right here. And we just made a rough block out and slowly refined it. And you can see I'm still in block out stage, right? Like nothing's subdivided, everything's very rough. But the most important part is all the major forms are there, a lot of the plane changes, the bevels, you know, all of the main ideas are starting to be there and the silhouette is there. And then from there on, it's just a process of refining and adding detail and learning how to transition the shapes. But other than that, it's pretty much already done in the blockout stage. And so you can see here's an example of my topology from the high poly. And we go through and we just high poly this block out and add the details until it's finished. Also, if anyone's interested and you haven't done any sub D or you just want to get into sub D, I put up a YouTube video on an introduction to sub D, and I can also answer any questions and even do a quick intro in here if people would like. Just feel free to let me know, like any questions of anything or any vocabulary I use, you know, feel free to let me know, because I don't want anyone to feel confused or left behind. All right, cool. So how's everybody feeling about this so far? Does it feel like this is, does anyone have questions about it? It's more what I'm wondering. In the early stage when you're cutting shapes, do you not worry a lot about the topology? So I actually do worry a lot about the topology, but it's more keeping things planar, which I'll also cover in this class, so don't worry. And I cover it in also one of my YouTube videos. Let me pull up an example very quickly of worrying about my topology. So yeah, I think it's really important, and this comes with practice over time. Like when you're in the blockout stage, it's actually incredibly important to be forward thinking with your topology. You know, you want to make sure that you're building on a foundation that's easy to complete, right? You don't want to be creating something that's going to be much more painful to finish. So for example, here, all of these big faces, I'm keeping perfectly flat. And I'm making sure that I have like my edge flow set up in such a way that I can add bigger bevels if I want, or, you know, kind of do what I want in the future. So for example, here you can see I thought about making sure I could add bevels here. I made sure that if I put details here, it's not going to pinch or cause any issues. And I'll cover all of that. But yes, it comes with practice though. You know, it takes time to kind of know what topology is a good foundation. So yeah. And David said what's sub D, and yes, it is subdivisions in the topology. TJ says, do you re-topologize before you finish? No, I do not. So that's why I block out like this, so I can just refine the block out into a final model like this. And it's all polymodeled in Max using sub D. Yeah, so you can see that this is in the class for your work. Did you show the research stage in the process, or you make it with your knowledge already in your head? So I'm going to go over some of it. Do you guys want me to go more over the research process? All right, I'll go over it a bit. I'll be honest, my research process for the one I'm going to make is I have an idea in my head, but I will kind of go over thinking about the things that I'm going to be thinking about as I get into it. Honestly, I would say my research process at this point is really just a shape that I had in my head, and I'm going to block it out, and we're going to refine it and make the design look good and research it as we go. For the class also, I'm not doing a ballistic weapon because, like I said, I think the more abstract your design, the more freedom you have to practice the abstractive design, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Alex says, will Ngons create problems for low poly bake? That is, no, they will not. But the thing with Ngons, and I am very passionate about this issue, Ngons do not ever cause issues unless you have a face that is not planar, because non-planar faces do not handle Ngons well. Perfectly flat faces don't care about Ngons at all, as long as they're supported properly with proper support loops in Geo. So Ngons never cause issues unless, one, you have to deform the mesh, like animate it, like a character. Two, if you're putting it into a game engine and it triangulates poorly, as on import, triangulation will occur. And if it is bad, because the engine doesn't like to handle Ngons or certain types well, then yeah, you'll have to fix it. And then maybe if you have some other weird fringe case where you have some proprietary thing that doesn't like Ngons, then sure. But on a whole, subdivision modeling with Ngons is not an issue at all, so long as you meet those criteria. All right. So would you guys like to see an example of kind of the student-teacher critique process from the last class? All right. So this is Jason's model from the last class. This is the blockout he started with. And basically what I do is I'll give you guys red line overs either in class or offline on the forums, which we'll have set up this week. And we'll get a link out to everyone to make sure that they can join. But yeah, so a red line over will typically look like this. And I'll give you critique based on a lot of the things that we've talked about in the class, whether it's design or modeling. But I think primarily we're going to just talk about design in the blockout stage, unless you start adding a ton of bevels really early. But yeah, I'll definitely give critique on both. And so this is his second version, and I give a little bit more critique. And then let's see, let me pull up the next one. And so then he got a little bit more refined. And then a little bit more after I give some red line overs. And I also can do paint overs for things. So in this one, actually, I did a full concept, but I never showed him that. And this isn't the full concept. This is just a rough line over. But yeah, and then so by the end of the class, he had a pretty decent blockout. He still has to subdue it, but that's a good point, though. If you guys don't feel like you have time to push yourself and really take the time that you want, don't feel rushed like you need to have it finished by the end of the class. While it would be nice, I think it's incredibly important that you worry more about pushing yourself and, you know, taking yourself to the level that you want to be at. And so if that takes longer, that's okay, you know. Time, this is like, you know, this is practice time. There's no reason to rush. So don't feel obligated to go very fast. But yeah, so this is basically he went from that to this. So I thought that was pretty cool progress. And I thought he had some pretty interesting shapes going on. So the class is just these webinars and feedback, right? Well, you can watch the videos offline. There's offline feedback, and I can also give feedback during the class. Yeah. Cool. All right. Do you guys want me to cover any more intro to hard surface stuff in the class, or do you want me to start talking about design basics? and just kind of a little bit getting into the design theory of stuff. All right. All right. So I just want to talk a little bit about, all right, cool. So I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of the type of design I'm going to be teaching and kind of how I feel like it's best to learn. Everybody learns differently, of course, but I think for me, the way that I learned is through critique and constant critique. I feel like it's the best way to learn because design is about learning to see abstraction. So let me give an example, and let me pull up Photoshop, and we'll get into this. But before I open that, I just want to say, so basically there's a few types of ways to see design, and one of the things people said that was really helpful during the last class is I kind of changed, or they felt that I had changed how they looked at design as a whole, you know. I think one thing that a lot of people get and that they see in certain things is the abstract of design, but I feel like people tend to keep it in their own medium. So what is abstract of design? So abstractive design is the type of design that I want to be focusing on. You could call it aesthetics, you could call it really whatever you want, but to me, I see it as abstract because it's design without relation to context. It's not related to function. While it works with function, it's separate. And that's why when they say form follows function, right? It's the form, it's the shape, it's the look of something without its context. What is it? And that's really the most important thing I think that you can learn is to see design without looking at something as its own subject. So for example, when you look at a gun, you don't think about it as a gun, you think you're looking at the lines of it or the forms of it or the shapes of it, or, you know, are parts of it even? Can we make it a little bit more dynamic? We're not thinking, oh, is this bolt the right size? We're thinking, is the placement of this bolt making the design balanced? You know, so it's design without context. And now context is incredibly important in design, but I think that's something most people can kind of learn and ascertain on their own. And so during this class, I'm just going to be focusing purely on the abstract most of the time. And I feel like that's usually the most challenging part for people to see. And so before I talk anymore, and feel free to let me know if I ramble because I love to talk, and let me know if I'm making sense or if I can explain anything more clearly. You know, this class is for you guys. And I want to make sure that I'm explaining things as clear as you guys would like. And I know that everyone here has different varying skill levels and backgrounds, so I want to make sure that we're kind of accommodating everyone. So feel free to let me know before I continue talking if any of that makes sense and if you'd like any clarity on anything. And always feel free to just type in the chat at any time. I'll just give you guys a few seconds if you want to type something up. If not, I'll just get going in a sec. When you're modeling, do you take the side view into Photoshop to do line overs? Yeah, if it's what I think is necessary. I've done that before. I don't do it as much anymore unless I'm really stuck on something. So for example, when I was working on my first gun, and let me pull that up. I have like 1,000 images I have to sort through. But yeah, so when I was working on my first gun, I was a bit stuck on the internals area. And so I did do paint overs for it. And sometimes I also will label the functional parts of things. So for example, in this gun, I researched how an antimatter cannon would hypothetically work and also what a particle accelerator needs. And so for example, this stores anti-hydrogen at absolute zero, so it becomes, inert. And if you know science stuff, I'm sorry if I use things wrong. I'm not a scientist, but I'm trying to approximate it. And so, for example, I have a charge exchange cell and an accelerator and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, so the point is, though, really do whatever it takes to help you get to the next step. If you get stuck and you need to do a paint over, if you want a photo bash, if you need to just sit and think about it, there's no rules. Figure out what works best for you when you need to problem solve. So think of it like that. You're not going to always love your design. It's all about problem solving. So don't think of it as a bad thing if you don't like it. Think of it as a problem to be solved and ask, why don't I like it? So the abstracted design, and I'm just going to get back to that, is basically design without context, as I was saying. So while I am thinking about this subconsciously as a handle, what I'm mostly focused on, especially at the start, is what are the shapes? Are the shapes dynamic? So for example, with this one, I'm focusing on trying to make an interesting interior shape. I don't want the angles to be even, so I'm not thinking about what is this rubber at this moment. I'm thinking this is a small edge, this is a large edge, this is medium edges, and this is a small, this is a large. And I'll go over why that matters later. Or I'm also thinking, okay, the top of this shape is simple, and the bottom of this shape is nice and complex, and we have a contrast between these two. Contrast is going to be something that we're going to talk a lot about, because contrast has many words. But at this stage, this is the type of things that I'm thinking about. And in fact, I'm going to pull up my last gun, or the earliest block out of this, just to help demonstrate that point, because I think showing it when it's more finished makes it a little more confusing. So this is the very block out that we started with. And so in this, I'm thinking a lot of stuff. Like, for example, what are the proportions of this barrel to the back of it? We've got 70% longer, 30% smaller. So it's not even. That's important. Or I'm saying, oh, okay, well, if you look at the length of this thing to this thing, they're even. I'm not thinking, oh, this is a stock for the gun. Oh, this is where they latch together. And while I am thinking about that, that's not really what you should be focusing on. You should learn to think about these things separate. Think about the proportions of things, the line work of it, the form of it, independent of the context, while thinking of the context, but see them as two separate things. So for example, here, I'm like, oh, okay, well, these two angles are pretty even. I don't like that, so I'm going to change that. So that's kind of the basic idea of what abstraction is. I'm thinking about this form change here, or this plane change, whatever you want to call it, how it sticks out from the gun. That's more of an aesthetic thing, right? That's not necessarily 100% functional, but I make them work together. And then I make a shape over here that will echo it. So yeah, I don't expect you guys to understand this just yet. But the main point I'm trying to make before I actually talk about why those things I just said matter is, like I've said a few times, focus on separating the idea from the execution. Separate the abstract of it, like shapes, forms, proportions, the balance of it, all of this, from the fact that it's a gun, or it's a crate, or it's a tank in your head. While they go together, think about them in two different ways. That's why they call it form and function. Because form and function are separate, but a relationship. They're like yin and yang. You need one. You can't have one without the other. So, and they need to work together and complement each other. So I just want to really make that clear, because I think it's super important, and you have to learn how to see it. So let's talk a little bit about just some basic design principles. Actually, before I go on, Does anyone have any questions? Anything they'd like me to explain a little bit better? Even though I'm going to explain a lot of this stuff I just talked about. But feel free to ask me questions. Also, Aaron says, do you care to fix shading errors along the way? Yes, I do, because if something is a shading error, that means when I head poly it, it's still going to have a shading error. Certain things, you know, it's okay if you don't, and you just have to be aware of how to fix them. When you think about form and proportion, do you base your design in real-world weapons, even if it's sci-fi-ish? Well, I think, well, yeah. I mean, you have to think about the context, right? So even though I said not to, I'm not saying don't think about those things by any means. I'm saying learn to think about them separately, form and proportion and all of those things. Think about them separate from the function, but still in relation to it. So for example, on this gun, right, I'm thinking about all the shapes, but then I'm also thinking, is there enough room between the trigger guard and the trigger for a hand to be comfortable? Is the hand ergonomic, or the handguard ergonomic enough? Is it the right size? How will the human finger feel on that? You know, is the stock going to be something that someone would be comfortable using? Or, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but yeah, I'm thinking about that a bit. And you do want to think about archetypes. So for example, when someone looks at a gun, and this kind of goes in the context side of design, but when someone looks at a gun, they should usually be able to tell, you know, is it a heavy weapon? Is it a rifle? Is it an SMG? Is it a pistol? So form factors, yeah, they do play a role absolutely in your design. In fact, and this will be a topic for maybe another day, but sci-fi design in general, it should be influenced very heavily by the real world around you, but you're elevating the function and aesthetics of it. And so I think what happens is a lot of people get into making sci-fi that's random without actually knowing why they're doing the choices they are. Like, if you make a sci-fi latch, well, let's say it's 500 years in the future, someone's still going to have to open that with their hand. You know, if you make a gun 10,000 years in the future, someone's still going to have to hold it. And so, yes, I think you should think about those things, and in sci-fi even more, because sci-fi that doesn't think about these things will feel very weird and random. You know, everything should have a purpose, regardless if it's sci-fi, functional, or aesthetic. But yeah, hopefully I don't say too many words that's complicated. Feel free to let me know. Awesome. I'm glad that was a good explanation for you. Yeah, by the way, the topic of sci-fi design in general, I'll probably talk about during a class, because we'll have periods in this class where things can probably get a little bit more like a demo, and I'm just talking about my choices. But, you know, feel free to like bring up any topics, you know, like how to improve or marketing or portfolio, which we'll talk about in later classes. But all right, so let's just talk a little bit about design. And we'll actually go into explaining it now that I've explained the difference between contextual design and aesthetics or abstract design. And so as I mentioned, abstract is proportion and all of these different things. So let's start with one of the most basic and important and fundamental things that has to do with visual design. Let's talk about evenness. Evenness has many applications and ways to spot it and different words for it. So I'm sure that if you've done graphic design or anything else, you've heard of hierarchy, right? Big, medium, small, primary, secondary, tertiary, contrast, and then evenness, 50-50, 70-30. So basically, all of those things are the opposite of evenness: hierarchy, big, medium, small, contrast. They're all saying that this is different than that. So I'm going to give a good example, and it's going to talk a bit to you, hopefully, about why certain things shouldn't be even. So I want you to look at these two circles, and I want you to tell me which one of these is most important. You can't. They're exactly the same. This is boring as well. You can't even tell the difference. Yes, the left is totally different. The one in the middle, yes, that's right, Alex. But then, let's say I do this. Now which one's most important? Big boy. Yeah, the big boy is. Now, what if I do this? And let me change this one. Now which one is more important? Or which one catches your eye the strongest? Let me turn off this stroke. Let me change the background as well. Which one of these is strongest? Yep, it's the right one. Because now this one is brighter. But now if I were to ask you, let me change these again. Let me turn off the stroke on this one. My shapes are having a stroke. It's not good. So while this one, the big one, is now brighter or more important, the point is they're still the same in value. So what I've demonstrated is two different ways that things can be even or similar or less clear which is most important. So we talked about value and size. There are many more ways that we can apply all of these things. But the point is, your brain subconsciously, and this is really the key, I think, to design. Your brain always wants to know what is most important, right? That's why there's hierarchy. Your brain wants to know subconsciously, when it looks at something, what is the most important information? And you may not know it, but this is everywhere. It's when you go to the grocery store. It's when you look at a web page. If you pull up, let's just bring up some random web page like Dell.com. Hopefully it has a good example. So you can tell here what's most important to Dell is showing their websites. They already have their brand pretty well explained, so the brand doesn't need to be big. But under that, we have the smaller and more and less important information because they want to catch your eye. Now, let me look at graphic design actually, because I think it'll be a better example. That wasn't the best. Let's look up promotional sign. Even this one will have hierarchy. It's pretty clear. Let's see. These signs will have hierarchy. So hierarchy in the context of even signs is actually incredibly important. And usually it goes, your most important information is the biggest. It's the most clear. You want someone to know what it is. And then you want to give them the second most important information, and then the third. So here we see Hopkins Homes. That is what they want you to see. They want the logo. They want you to know what the name of it is. And then they want to tell you similar sites required. I don't know what that means, but I'm sure that if I was looking for a home or something like that, I might know, or whatever this is. But then the second and third most important information is the email address. And then for further information, please telephone. So you can see here we have our primary, secondary, and tertiary. And this yard sign one wasn't helpful, but even when you look at a political name, it says the name first, and then what they're doing. They want to be a judge or something like that, or sheriff. That's the second most important thing. So hierarchy is all around us, and I'll give a lot more examples as we go on, especially the grocery store one, which I think is really good. But the point is, the human mind craves understanding of difference. It wants to know what's the most important thing, and then it categorizes things from most important to least important. And so as a designer, it's your job to tell someone this, what is the most important thing? And it's not just the most important thing, it's knowing how to do it with shapes. How to make a shape that's interesting because it's not all the same. So I'll explain how that works, but you could think of this as 50-50 and 70-30. So look at this. So evenness. These are exactly the same. They're 50-50. No one is clearly more important than the other one. The human mind doesn't really know what to do with it, and it's not very interesting. But if we take this and we make one clearly bigger than the other, or brighter, we can start to see the difference in importance. And so that's why I say that this is contrast hierarchy, which I don't actually know how to spell that word correctly. I'm sorry for the eye bleeding red. And you could also call it big, medium, small. But the point is that they're different from one another. And so I'm going to actually use hierarchy in these texts to tell you what's most important and least. So you know the main concept is evenness, and now you know some other ways to look at it. And so I gave you the most important and the second most important. So that's just a high-level overview of the basics of evenness. Now, in this class, whenever I'm making something that's even, I'll tell you why I'm not going to make it even, and I'm going to give you many specific examples. So does anyone have any questions about this? And the vocabulary words I want you to learn are like evenness, contrast, hierarchy, big, medium, small. We'll talk about them a bit more, but I just want to make sure that everyone's following along. And if you have any questions, let me know. David says, there are endless ways to make things not even. What are you thinking about and which ways you want to change things? What are you thinking about and which ways you want to change things? So I'll kind of go over that as I'm modeling, and I'll give examples. I don't want to get too far into that just yet, but yes, there are endless ways. Yeah. So I'm actually going to bring up a few examples of evenness, since I don't think anyone has any other questions. So this is a really old one I made, and I actually have an evenness document that I will show you guys in a bit that I think is a very clear explanation of what evenness is and how to avoid it. There's no reason saying 90-10 or 80-20 or 70-30, David asked, but to me the most important thing is, why are you picking 90-10 or 80-20? You know, there's different reasons for different proportions. I wouldn't think about it too mechanically, but the main point is more of this than that, because it creates dynamicism. So more of this than that. So here's one of my favorite examples. You know, if you've ever made a level in an environment, or you've ever played around with CryEngine and just painted trees everywhere, one of the things that you'll notice is they have a size variance option, so every tree you place isn't the same. You know, that's weird, that's artificial, it's not normal. And so, for example, in nature, there's so much size variation to things, and this is the kind of thing that we want to instill in our designs because it makes them more interesting. Evenness on its own isn't bad, but what it does do is it creates a lack of hierarchy, and it makes it less interesting. So if you are making something even, it needs to be for a very, very explicit choice, right? Like, it's the difference between knowing something and doing it, and not knowing it and doing it all over because you don't know better, right? So, for example, one thing that a lot of people tend to do, and especially children and anyone starting out, is they will try and make everything even. It's the human instinct is to make things even. So for example, if we look at this panel, all of these panel cuts are the exact same surface area pretty much. And you can see it here, they're all medium shapes. There isn't much contrast. And then if you even look where he divided this whole plate, it's directly down the middle. And now the top and bottom have very similar sizes. And then if we look at the leg armor, the divisions are very evenly done as well, where on the kneecaps, he had a main or a primary form and shape and a secondary. And you can see here as well, this is even to this, to this, to this. This is even all the way around. And so the fix to these is to try and have big shapes and medium shapes. And I have much better examples that I'm going to pull up, but this is the most basic one. Because like I said, which one of these is most important? And I'm sorry for this really poor image. Which one of these is most important? You don't know which plate is most important. Your brain doesn't put hierarchy to it. Let me pull up my other examples. So there was on the forums, there was someone who posted a character. And let me show that really quick. And I gave him a red line over, specifically addressing this topic. And Kane says, does the shape of an object affect where the eye looks as well? Yes, it does. So I don't want to get too complex, but yeah, like the directionality of a shape is incredibly important. And that's why, and I'll talk about it actually on this one, why some shapes guide the eye and some don't. So let's just take a look at this guy's thing really quick. And actually after this, I want to give a great example on evenness and one of my favorite and most interesting phenomena that I've noticed. But yeah, so one thing that this guy does is he ended up making everything very even, right? Like the top of his head, he would divide everything into these even chunks. All of these form changes are even sized. You know, if you look at the width of this piece of it to the thing in between to here, they're roughly the same size. All of these little form changes and details are all the same size. Same thing with here, like if you go through this chest, all of the divisions in it are roughly the same size. Same thing here on the arm, right? There's a very clear lack of hierarchy and a lot of sandwiching going on. Stuff that's all very similar in size being put together. And so the solution to that is to try and add hierarchy, right? So here I did a quick paint over and I made a bigger shape. This is the primary form and shape. This is the most important one. And then we have the secondary ones. And then we have the smaller tertiary ones. Same thing with the shoulder pads. We have the main and large shape, and then we have the smaller shape, the sub shape. Yeah, same thing on the back, although you can even tell in this paint over it actually gets a little bit even, but we still have a little bit more hierarchy going on than he had here. It was a bit crazy. So these are very important things to look out for. Same thing here, right? Like you can see the side view of the shoulder. We have a main and a sub rather than two evenly sized pieces, or primary and secondary. So you can see though how, while I do call it evenness, I'm also talking about primary and secondary. I'm talking about main and sub, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Let's talk, actually before I go into shapes a little bit, does anybody have questions on that? Do you want me to go over any part of this a little bit more? Because shapes are pretty interesting to me. Did you have to unlearn evenness? Yes. You have to learn it because, actually I'm just going to kind of go off on a tangent right now and talk about evenness a little bit more before I go into shapes, because I think that's incredibly interesting. And it demonstrates the human mind before it learns to avoid evenness. And I think that there's some people who have a natural talent for it, but I think for most people, even if you have a natural talent, it's a skill. You know, you have to teach your brain to see it, which is very hard, you know. Every human being instinctively loves to make things even. It is absolutely instinctual. So this is my favorite example. Let's look up a children's drawing. This is my favorite example, and I think it's incredibly fascinating. Let's see, what's a really good one? And some children make stuff less even than others, but let's So let's save some of these, and I'm gonna make a point. I'm gonna leave it off the screen though, really quick, because I just want to save these out. And yeah, while I'm saving these, I just want to say on that note, design in the abstract is very much learning how to see certain things and see vocabulary stuff so that you can quantify it. So for example, what is a plane change? Well, a plane change is when one plane of a model or a design goes from one to the other, which I'll talk about later if you don't know what that is. You know, but you need to learn to see that, right? Like if I tell you what a plane change and you don't know what it is, how are you going to learn to know how to see it in your model? If I say avoid evenness and you don't know how to see the evenness, how are you supposed to change it? You know, if I say work on transitioning your forms and you don't know what that really means, then how are you supposed to see it? So yes, I think everything is a process of learning to see it, to see evenness, to see hierarchy, and to kind of give yourself this self-critique using the vocabulary of abstractive design to troubleshoot. All right, so let's pull up Photoshop. And I just got a few of these examples I'm going to bring in. And unfortunately, I can't find my very favorite one. But I just find this very fascinating and something that I have found that I struggled with when I learned to draw, because I learned to avoid evenness in 3D. I didn't draw first. So for me, it was really eye-opening and frustrating as hell to make everything even though I knew not to, because my brain, while I was learning to draw, was like, no, everything must be even. And I was like, please stop doing this. Like, why? And yeah, it took me time, but let's look at a child's drawing. Every single tree is placed equidistant from one another. Or roughly. There's no real rhythm to it. They're not exact, but there's no overlapping. There's no clear hierarchy. There's no clear, oh, this one is drastically smaller than the other, or this one's behind the other one. It's all evenly distributed. All of the plants, or most of the plants, end in the middle of the page. All of the butterflies are the same size. The sun is the same size as the butterflies. These birds have the same size as as everything else. Every single one of these right here is even. Let me make this smaller. Same thing here, even. It's just incredibly fascinating to me that this is what the human mind tends to do and enjoys doing. We can also see this in just this drawing, for example. Every character is roughly evenly spaced. The clouds and the umbrella divide the canvas into thirds for the worst. They're the same size detail, and they actually create this invisible line right here. There's no overlap. One cloud isn't smaller and behind the umbrella. But it's just very interesting that we do this instinctively, especially when we're children, right? Like, if you look at these hills, they're all evenly divided. It's just, I don't know, I find it extremely fascinating and interesting, but it kind of is an example of how when you're learning design, right, like, we're not going to be thinking of things like overlapping the clouds so that they go behind the umbrella to imply depth. We don't think about the hierarchy of this umbrella to this cloud. And in the same way, and to kind of go into Aaron's his question, which is, do you have different principles for hard surface to organic? No, I believe this stuff is universal. You know, if you think about music, right, there's a reason why people are attracted generally to certain songs more than others. Now, people have different genres of music that they like, right? Like, someone might like rap, so they don't like a country song. But the thing is, a lot of people will generally find something to be a hit, right? There's a reason why a lot of people will like a certain song. It's not saying it's a definite rule, But what it is showing is that there's a common ground. There's a common ground for what people find pleasing in music and also in art. So to kind of demonstrate that, if you think about music, and I think it's very good at explaining the abstract of design, music is called a composition, right? Because it's not about what the notes are. It's about how do they go together, how much of this note versus that one, how loud is this versus that, what's the rhythm of it. These are all placement and organization and size and hierarchy and importance. And people find certain things more pleasing. That's why in composition, when you compose an image, there's certain things that people consider good composition. It's the exact same thing though with hard surface design, with organic design. They all apply. You know, when you're making a rock, or let's say you're making a dirt texture and you have rocks in it. If you make every single rock the same size, it's not going to look good. It's not going to look natural. It's going to look weird. And while that might not seem important to hard surface, it is. It's incredibly important because it's about making something dynamic. Now, while that's not necessarily true that making something dynamic is good, it will be pleasing to the eye. And I don't want to explain that too much because I don't want to get complicated, but I will cover it. In character drawing, the gesture is really important. Do you apply gesture to hard surface design? I would consider that the blockout stage, you know, where you're just getting everything in, and it's about the big picture. It's about the roughest stages of it, and then you refine it. Cool. All right. Does anyone have any questions on this before I continue, or any thoughts, or feel free to ask or say anything. In organic, symmetry is considered beautiful. I think the symmetry is beautiful. There's nothing wrong with symmetry at all. It's about knowing when to use it, right? Like, symmetry can be undynamic in a way because there's no directionality between left and right or top or bottom, depending on which way it's symmetrical. So there's not much direction to it. But you can have directionality in other ways, right? Like a square, and I'm actually, you know what? This is a good segue into the next topic, which is shapes. In 2D design, you have the rule of thirds. Is there anything similar in sculpture? I think that the rule of thirds is really just a way to explain 70-30 and hierarchy and all of these things. Because if you think about it, right, like if you're taking a picture and you have something on the third of the left or the third of the right, it basically is meaning there's more space on the other side of the canvas than there is on the, like, let's say, let me give an example. I don't want to get too abstract with my explanation. I think that in anything that you do, it's still describing evenness. So let me find a composition very quickly to answer your question. So let's see if I find some random image. It's also not to say that evenness is always bad. It's not true at all. There are reasons to use evenness, but you need to be a bit more specific. So here's just some random wallpaper I found. Oh no, my computer's locking up. This isn't good. Sorry everyone, my computer's deciding it doesn't like working sometimes. All right, I had to open up a new window. Sorry, got to find an image. All right, so here's an example. This is just some random image that I found on my computer. Basically, in the rule of thirds, right? there's more page size or more distance on that side than this one. And so you still have that directionality. Of course, composition, there's reasons for center weighted compositions, but yeah. All right, so we're going to talk about shapes. Let's talk about shapes. Shapes have a lot of very important things that make an interesting shape. There's a lot of stuff to talk about with shapes, but let's just cover some of the very basics during this class. And so, for example, a square. If you ask yourself, what direction does a square guide the eye? Nowhere. Because it's completely symmetric in every direction. Every angle or every edge on a square is the same size. There's no variation. It's all even. It's not bad, but it won't guide the eye at all because it's not telling your eye where to go. So this is a very boring, least dynamic shape. It's not saying squares are bad, but if you want something to be dynamic and you make it a square, you're probably going to struggle to do that. So, and the reasoning is, as I said, there's no directionality to it. So let's look at a rectangle. A rectangle has much more variety. It has medium and large, or it could have small and large. It doesn't really matter, but in this example, there's left or right directionality. It's clear that one side is longer than the other or bigger than the other. So this is a little bit more dynamic. This is a more interesting shape. And so I tend to base everything off of a rectangle unless I'm trying to make something less dynamic. And then let's go to a more and most dynamic shape. Here, we have a few things going on. I'm going to explain the most important one and one that covers what we've talked about, which is small, large, and medium angles. What we're doing is we're combining these different lengths of angles to avoid evenness, and we're also making it asymmetric to create directionality. Your eye is going to go definitely one way or the other, and it's incredibly important to do this. So I'm going to bring up one of my favorite artists and just talk about his shapes for a bit. If you guys have heard of Paul Richards, I'm going to put a link to his portfolio in the chat. And I'm going to explain how he has this and almost everything he does. And there's a lot more that goes into shapes than just evenness, but I think that's where I want to start today. You know, hopefully we can get to starting the block out today. I don't want to overload everyone with tons of nuances of design and all of that. But so here's his portfolio. Let's just find a few shapes we can use to demonstrate some of these principles. So let's pull up this guy. And let's pull up. Let's see what's a really good one. But his shapes are incredibly dynamic, and I feel like he's probably one of the best artists I've ever seen at naturally doing a lot of these things without thinking, whether it's from hard surface design to organics. You know, he really is good at applying a lot of design theory quite expertly and mixing it with context. So I'm just going to do a few red line overs on some of his stuff to help demonstrate these things. How's everyone feeling so far? How's it going? It's all well. I'm glad that it's Gucci. Cool. I'm glad that people are excited. That gets me excited. Sometimes you feel crazy when you're just talking to yourself for long periods of time. You feel like you're going insane. So beyond evenness avoidance, there's tons of things that he does in his art. Some of those things are a little bit more complex subjects that I'll cover at a certain point. But let's just talk about evenness and simple versus complex. So again, clear your mind of this being a whale, a space whale. Doesn't matter. We don't care the fact that it's a whale. We don't care about its fins right now. We don't care. We care about what are its properties. So one thing that he does a lot is he has contrast between simple and complex. So for example, this shape on the top is much simple. This shape is much more complex, and there's much more going on. But what this does is it adds a nice contrast. You can see it even here, simple versus complex. And what would happen if you didn't do this with this shape, it would be like this. It would just be a mess. It would have no contrast, and you wouldn't even be able to tell what's more important than the other, and it would just look crazy. So let's look at also the angles, right? So he's got small, medium, large, medium. He's literally doing the same thing that we do in hard surface in his whale. Same thing here. He has this angle is small for his medium, and this one's small, so small, medium, large. And then if we look in here, he avoids this very expertly as well on a smaller scale. So what he does is he has small, medium, large, medium, small, medium. There's a lot of rhythm and variety to it. And he does this, I'm sure at this point, without thinking. Even the negative space here. This one is like a small, and then we go to a more medium one, and then a bigger one, and then eventually we go to the even bigger one, and then we go to the biggest negative space of all. So he's having this contrast between them, this big, medium, small. And so this stuff is being done on many different ways. And then also, while the top is also simple and the bottom's complex, he also makes contrast between that on the bottom, right? Like there's simple areas and complex areas. Same thing here. So if you look at this thing's overall shape, you can tell that it's basically these two shapes. Actually, let me make that like 1 point bigger just so it's not hard to see. So while he has a design, the biggest changes in it are asymmetric. And then there's also hierarchy to them. So the front is smaller than the back. And the back, like the main shape of the back, is bigger than the front. The front goes from big to small, so it's pointing forward. But because the back is bigger, there's overall directionality to it, right? Like if we had this whole change right here happen in the middle, your eye would be like, oh, do I go this way or this way? You know, it'd be stuck. It wouldn't really know which direction is most important, the front or the back. But subconsciously, your brain knows now, front and the back. So if we look at the big shapes, we can see that this one is the most important. So let's make most important pure red to make your eyes bleed. This is the primary shape. And then we have here the secondary shape. And then we have our tertiary shape over here jutting out. And there's much more going on here than just this. But this is one way to look at it. So you can see he's applying the same concept of big, medium, small from the angles and lines of his thing to the overall shapes of this object. And one thing that Paul Richards does fantastically is hierarchy. Like for example, this prop. He has big, medium, small. Big shape, actually I'll do red again. He's got his big primary looking thing with beautiful paint over, don't judge. And then he's got this medium shape and form. And then here he has his tertiary, smaller ones. And I can tell that he does this subconsciously because he's done it so much. And so, you know, it kind of goes back to, I don't remember if it's Aaron or David's question, but it's about like, oh, it's TJ's question. Did you have to unlearn evenness? It's not just unlearning, it's practicing not doing it actively and learning how to make it become a reflex rather than, let me sit and study this. You know, at a certain point, it should become instinctive. So you can see here, the main area of change is 70% large, 30% here. So he's divided this whole asset 70-30. Now there are areas of evenness actually. If we look here and here, these are starting to get a bit even. And so it just also goes to show that no matter who you are, you will never avoid all evenness. It is literally impossible. And so that's why I think the more you are aggressive as hell about avoiding it, the less evenness you'll have, but you'll still always have it. Jesse says, do you ever think of gradients like that on that piece has more detail on the bottom? I think I understand what you're asking. Do you ever think of gradients like that on a piece as more? So that where details go, I'll probably talk to at a later point, maybe next lesson, but I like to think of it as detail distribution. Where you put details is incredibly important, and there's other concepts that kind of go into that. I think that we'll talk about design for like probably another 35 minutes, and I think we should probably start blocking something out. Unless you guys want design to take up the whole class. What do you guys think? I mean, there's 22 of you, so I'd like to hear your opinions. And then in the meantime, I'll answer questions. Is it possible to make something appealing without using these principles? So that's an interesting question. The way that I see it is, if something is visually interesting, you don't necessarily need to know principles to do that, right? Like at a certain level, these things can become intuitive. You know, some people know how to make something look interesting without even considering these at all. But the point is, I wouldn't be surprised if they were doing them subconsciously. And like the idea of contrast, for example, someone can do this naturally, right? Like you don't have to think about it. But the difference is, if you want to make something that's for production, like in design and art, truly, there is no right and wrong. Anything goes. Making a children's drawing is perfectly fine. Throwing your water bottle on the floor and then talking about the significance of it is art. I mean, anything can be art. There's no right or wrong. But let's say you're designing something for a movie, or you want to know how to make something look dynamic, or you want to take a picture that is powerful. While you can do these things without knowing any of this, if you know exactly why it's powerful instead of just, oh, I just made it like that, then you can recreate it more easily, right? Like you know why it's powerful. You know how you did it and why you made those choices. And it's about like knowing how to make stuff pleasing. So yes, a design can be good without those rules, but chances are it follows those rules to some extent. It's not like you're always going to make everything dynamic or that everything needs to be dynamic. Like you can design a semi-truck that looks cool. So, all right, yeah, we can do, we'll do a little bit of lockout. Oh, you guys want to do, so we'll do a little, I'll try and see if we can fit everything in. I mean, honestly, my classes usually take a while because I have a lot to talk about and do. Yeah, so hopefully we can get a little bit into the blockout, get the basic shapes in, and talk a little bit about research. But we'll also do research as we work on it. And yeah, but Kane, Does that answer your question at all about making something interesting without using the principles? Cool, I'm glad. What are the lesson lengths? Typically, I do like 1 to 4 or 5. It just depends. Usually, I end around 4:30. The last class was, I think, 13 classes, and it was a lot. But this one, we're going to make it a little bit smaller and more compact. Okay, so we were looking at evenness and hierarchy. You can see here on a lot of these angles, for example, this one, the way that he's dividing this is 70-30, right? Like this is smaller. It's not exactly 30, but I'm going to use these numbers to represent difference. And then if we look at this angle versus this one, there's a difference in size. So we have, large, medium, and then slightly bigger. But then we can also start to see there is evenness here. If we look here to here, there's evenness here. Now, like I said, evenness in itself isn't a bad thing, but knowing that you're doing it and only doing it consciously, the more that you do that, the better. Like for example here, even the negative shapes have contrast to them, right? Like we got small, medium, we have different angles, and while these two are the same here, and these two are the same, the overall shape of this goes from big to small. So it's going into this right here. So there's a lot of stuff going on. And there's also a lot more of shapes going on than I'm explaining at the moment. But like if we look at this shape, it's highly dynamic. The most important part of it is just like the whale, and you can see this, right? Like so this shape is 2 trapezoids. One of them is bigger than the other, and so we have directionality, and it's more of a 70-30, right? It's very dynamic. Then we have these smaller little pieces and long. So we got medium, small, long, or large. All right, I'm going to bring up one more example really fast. And so on here, when we talk about simple versus complex, you can see he's made the top very simple, and the bottom is very complex. This side is nice and simple. This side is simple, but it has a bit more complexity to it. This side right here is simple. This one becomes more complex. Now, it doesn't mean like, oh, you have to have everything be simple or everything complex or contrast between the two, but it's one thing a lot of people will run into is they'll start making shapes that are like this. Let me open a new document. So they'll make shapes that are very confusing and mushy. And one of the easiest ways to avoid that is just not making stuff or giving a lot more contrast to stuff. So all right, I have to try and make a crazy shape. So the biggest issue with this shape is that it's not very clear. There's a few things going on that make it not clear beyond the fact that it's complex all over. But one of them is we have a lot of very unclear angle changes, and it just starts to get pretty mushy, right? Like you don't want stuff where, actually, I don't know if this is the best example. You don't want to have shapes where it's like, oh yeah, this is getting better. All right, I am trying to make a very confusing shape, and I keep ending up making things dynamic. Yeah, that's better. So, and actually, I'll make the top complex too. All right, yeah, this is a better example. So a lot of times people will make like, let's talk about 3 things to do with shapes. So unclear angle changes, simple versus complex, evenness. All right. So the first thing that I notice a lot of people will tend to do when they make shapes is that they'll make angle changes like this, where they're very unclear, and they just start to get, it's like these shapes look like they form a curve, but they don't, and it's very complicated and even. So this is just one thing to avoid. If you have all these angle changes here, not only are they the same length, but it's very mushy, right? Like, it's just a very mushy, unclear shape. Like, is there an angle change there? I can't really tell. Where you want to usually have a lot more definition to it, or make it a curve or something, right? Like, this could easily be a pretty interesting curve. So that one's a little bit harder to describe, but I'm sure that I'll find an example and be able to explain it, or maybe that makes sense. But that's just a quick side note. And a lot of this comes, though, from, you know, not balancing simple and complex, because this is very complex. You know, this is very complex. Like, all these even unclear angle changes is complex. So that's one way that things can be a bit complex, but we see this motif continued around this whole shape. So actually, let me make this even more complicated and uninteresting. Let's make it based on a square. Let's make it nice and rectangular. So right now, we have a square shape. Everything's kind of evenly crazy, evenly complex. There's no clear directionality. My eye go this way, that way, this way. I don't know. I don't know which way to go. This is weird. So let's change that first. You know, we go back to that example on that guy's armor. You know, when you have a shape that's all a square, it's not very directional. So let's just quickly change that. Let's make this shape rectangular. You can already see instantly it's starting to look at least 15 to 20% cooler. And that's one of the most beautiful things about like abstractive design is like literally moving something or changing it just a small amount can have such a huge difference. It's fascinating. Like, it's kind of hard to explain, but there was a moment when I was learning design, and my coworker Jehun had said to me, he's like, just move this one piece up so that's at the top. Like, it was the smallest thing. It was just a little decal. And all of a sudden it looked 10 times better. And my mind like melted. I was like, how? Why? This is ridiculous. It's so fucking cool. And it was kind of then that I realized, like, you know, where something is placed makes all the difference in the world. And the difference between something being good and bad is a lot smaller than you think. And it was just incredibly fascinating. So I find that to be one really cool thing about design. Yeah. Any questions before I start critiquing the shape a little bit more? You guys want time to like take notes, take a break? How are things going? You know, I feel like I talk really fast and a lot, so I don't want to like get too crazy. I don't know if you should be eating my words. They're not very healthy. All right, cool. So let's take this shape and let's start working on the unclear angle changes and the evenness, since they kind of go together a little bit, right? Like, they're unclear for a few reasons, but one of them being mainly, you know, they're very even, and it just gets a little bit crazy and hard to really tell what's the dominant lines in this, you know. It's all kind of 50-50. And like to kind of answer someone's question, the difference between organic design and hard surface, this shape could be a rock, right? So if you have a rock where every side of it is super complex, it won't it probably won't read very well, right? You need contrast. Kane said, wondering what the homework is going to look like for this. I'll explain that at the end of the class. It's probably going to be finding your idea and making a block out. So I'm going to actually cover that in a little bit. I think after I talk about shapes, and I just want to recap a little bit. So making a block out and research, I think, was what we're going to do next. So yeah, let's start making some changes to the shape. So there are a few things I like about it. I like that it's a little bit directional. Like where this mass is kind of interesting. Like it's okay, but these things end on about the same points, and it's just very still static either way. But I can see a lot of potential in it. So let's make some adjustments to this. And because I made this all in the white layer, I'm kind of suffering. So bear with me. So I want to offset this piece to the back a bit. I want it to have a much more clear shape in the back. Let's do this. And so now we're going to put in a much longer angle, a nice small one at the end. And we're going to get rid of this extra complicated one down here. And so let's be mindful, right? Like we have a small and a medium and a large. So let's not make it too So there's a few things that we did in this shape. One of them is we have a nice size change. So from here, there's a lot of directionality, right? Like it goes from small to much larger to much smaller. And so your eye gets directed forward. There's width changes, right? Like this isn't even, it goes from big to small, big to small. And so there's a lot of directionality to it. That's one thing that's happening. The other one is we have contrast in these. So we've got small, small, medium, large, large, small, small, large, large, small, medium, small, medium. So obviously there's things that are kind of even, like actually this line and this line. But that's why I say if you still work on avoiding evenness, you'll run into this situation less, right? Like, okay, sure, I have 2 lines that are even, big deal. But what if it was 3 or 4 lines or 5 or 6? Then it starts getting kind of complex and uninteresting. There's still lots we could do with this shape, you know, like we could make it even more complicated on the bottom because the top is simple. But yeah, so we would have more complex, more simple on the top. Just an example. So before we move on from shapes, and I think we should probably get into a little bit more in the 3D in a second. So does anyone have any questions about this so far? Like evenness, hierarchy. Do you guys want me to talk a little bit more about learning how to see it? and like some things that you can do to kind of learn to find this stuff better and learn how to like instinctively kind of learn to see it. All right. So do you have a shape language, then you base that on the design? I think it depends. When I'm doing stuff for my own self, I don't always. If I'm doing something for a specific art style, say at work, I will usually have to make some kind of shape language. But when I'm really just kind of doing personal work, I feel like it kind of just happens, and I don't really think about it a ton. I guess I do probably think about it, but I don't think I consciously think about it as much. All right. So I just kind of want to quickly talk about learning to see this stuff, and I want to make a very important point. And oh, so Tam's asking, you make a basic shape and apply and repeat that shape on the design. Yes, I do. I'll usually call that echoing though, but yes, that is shape language. I probably think about it a little bit different, but together. I think I'll probably talk about that later. But I'll talk about echoing, and I have a few ways that I like to describe echoing and like methods and stuff that I can use for examples. Like I have a really good Spark example that I love to use for this talk. All right, so let's talk just very quickly about, actually before we do that, do you guys want to take a 5-minute break? I kind of have to get some water. So I want to take a quick break and deal, yeah, all right, let's do a break. All right, I'll be back.
Hey Alex, welcome back.
I'm not back. Jeez. All right. Hello. Is everybody here? Oh, all right. What were we talking about? We were talking about applying. Okay. I'll give everybody a few minutes. I'll give. I don't know. I'm afraid to say some of your guys' names. I don't want to butcher them. All right. I don't want to. How do you say his name? Gualami? He said he's grabbing food real quick. I don't want him to miss it. Sorry if I butchered your name as well. I tried
Should
really
be
hard.
Guillaume.
How do you say?
Guillaume.
Guillaume?
Yeah.
That's fancy. All right.
French and
Yeah, I'm really bad at pronouncing names, so I'll probably butcher everyone's name in here. So sorry. I apologize. All right. Let's talk about learning to see stuff. Let's talk about learning to see evenness and some like things that you can do. So I'm gonna delete everything in here. Let's go to Google. And let's, by the way, if this pulls up somebody's art, or somebody they know, or I'm just gonna look up sci-fi art in Google. Let's do sci-fi environments. And we're just gonna do a breakdown. I'm really sorry if anybody's stuff in here is in here. It's not intentional. let's just find something. But I find the best way to do it is to take somebody's art or something in real life and learn how to look for these things by doing red line overs like I do. Let's do sci-fi gun. And let's just pull any random gun that we find. Let's take this one. All right. Let's just get like one more. Trying to find one that's prime. There's actually some good Doom guns that would have worked for this pretty well. Oh well, let's just do 2 for now. But for me, talking about the learning to see stuff, like I remember when it first hit me that I could see this stuff naturally. I was looking at my shoe and I was like, why the hell is it even? I see it. And I was heartbroken. I almost cried. Just kidding. All right. So if we look at this gun, if we look at how this gun is divided, and this is a great way to learn, right? Like do paint overs and do feedback. Figure out and learn how to see these things. You can see it's pretty evenly divided across the gun. See that this is about the same height as this piece under it. And this piece above it is about the same height as the grip is tall. And we can see that this and this are pretty much about the even size. And so this is a good way to get started with this way of looking at stuff, right? Like you kind of have to just train your eye to see these things without really thinking about it. So let's do another one. And inversely, right, like when I pulled up the space whale, I was showing you how it's not even. So learning to recognize that too, it's like learning to recognize the difference. So let's just look at this guy real quick. We got a lot of evenness going on here. It's a black and white image. Yeah, it is. All right. RGB. Cool. We have 3. So here, we've got a lot of evenness going on. So it's all about learning to kind of see these things. And I like to call this a sandwiching effect, where somebody just crams a bunch of details into this sandwichy kind of thing. It's like here, this starts getting pretty even. We look at this shape, and 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 this one. And then if we look at this one in contrast to the one next to it, they're about the same size, about the same surface area. Like it's not exact, but there's no clear hierarchy, right? Like you're not like, oh yeah, one of those is clearly bigger. Like if you look at the length of them, it's pretty even. And then also everything kind of ends in the middle. So it's not 70-30. These are even, but they're repeating. Repetition isn't always bad. And so I think a lot of people mix those two things up, like, oh, repetition is evil. Well, that's not true at all. And actually, I'll show later, but I have some documents on using repetition and the purposes of it and how you can use it to guide the eye. And so there's actually a lot of reasons to use repetition, but we're not going to cover those today. Also, if you look at this, we'll notice that this is pretty much divided into 3 parts that are kind of even. Let me use a flicker. And this one's about the same. You just can't tell because of foreshortening. So there's some size contrast, but it's very minimal, right? Like he chose to make every angle kind of even if there are subtle curves to it. It starts to get a little unclear, like we talked about before. And a lot of these forms are very unclear as well. They're very mushy and kind of random, but I don't want to get too deep into that either, because that's a whole other topic. Form in general is. All right, so this is one of the best ways, I think, to learn to see things. Like, for example, you can see this form and this area over here are about the same size. So teach yourself to start seeing this stuff, you know, find things that are evenly divided and learn to break them down. And that's one skill. The skill that makes it hard to develop is now how do you make it better? So I highly recommend going around in the real world and look for evenness, like right now, or the opposite of it, right? Like look for hierarchy. Like, let me pull up this really quick. I don't want to get too crazy with the examples, but let's just look up doors, door. I'm just gonna look up a door. Let's find a good example. I was just looking at my door next to me, and it had some good examples. And so that's kind of why I wanted to find an example of a door. Just use this one. So learn how to see it in other situations too. So let's look at this door. And you can see that we have a small, medium, large. And then we have extra small. There's extra small here too. So there's contrast going on, right? Like we have all these different contrasts of line weights. Even here, we have medium and we have small. Then we have like this crazy large, infinite size of space. But then it's evenly divided down the middle, right? But on the whole, it's a little bit more interesting because it's not. And then we can see here, we're like, oh, okay, they're sandwiching. 1, 2, 3. But then if we zoom out a little bit, oh cool, I went on the same layer. Sorry, I'm such a genius. I gotta undo all this now. All right, so on the whole though, let's look at the proportions of it. It's actually pretty decent. It's pretty 70, 30, right? So there's things happening even though we have evenness that make this a little bit more pleasing. And we also have it here, you know, like it's just the fact that it's got that nice width changes there. So learn to go see it. Like you can look at your shoes, you could go look at your speakers, your water bottles, your lamps, your desk, your mouse, you know, anything. But it's about learning to see the vocabulary around you, you know, and that way when you look at your own thing and you're like, oh, okay, I can see the evenness now. And learning to see it more and fix it more. That's really where, and I mean, also other design rules, but evenness is the best example because I think it's the easiest to grasp. So David says, I hope this isn't a derailing question, but I had a teacher push the idea that some shapes are friendly, more square, and unfriendly, triangular. On a similar thought, how do you consider how acute angles are? Well, I think that you can think of shapes like that. That's what I feel like that's a bit more of a contextual thing. So like, for example, if you're making a semi-truck, generally, semi-trucks have very boring shapes, you know, like they're very big, slow, boring. And so, sorry, I got another question asked and it derailed my brain. Yeah, so like some shapes are big, slow, some are dynamic, right? Like if you're making a race car, or a racing spaceship or something, you're going to want more dynamic shapes so that people will kind of associate with that, right? Like shape psychology, where if you are making something that's supposed to be slow and boring, like you want to have less dynamic shapes, so more square or interesting. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the square versus triangular. I think that triangular implies danger, and because of its shape without context, dynamicism, because it's very directional, it's very pointing, where a square isn't. But the thing that I think is kind of interesting is, you know, there's a reason why humans find triangles or spike shapes dangerous. Like, if you hit your hand on a spike, you know that it's going to hurt you. Like, the human mind understands geometry subconsciously and instinctively, and it understands those things. Like, I'm sure an animal, if an animal who doesn't even think about shapes like this were to see something spiky, it would think, oh, I don't want to step on that, right? So I think that the human, like, it's for the same reason we think red is a lot more dangerous looking than green or blue. So yeah, to a degree, I agree with that, but I feel like that's more of like something that's a nuance or informs what shapes you choose, rather than why a shape is interesting or not. Hopefully that's helpful. Jesse says, would that be in regards to topology? Would what be in regards to topology? Yeah, so like the context of your shape is super important, but if you're just trying to make an interesting shape, like that's separate from the context, I think. Like they go together, but they're separate. Sorry, I don't understand what you meant in terms of topology, in regards to topology. If you could elaborate a little bit, that'd be helpful. Well, when you're modeling, I think the squares are, I mean, like think about when you're modeling, like I think topology matters. It's more about like what's a cool shape, and squares usually aren't cool. Oh, you mean triangles as in triangles modeling. I think he's talking just strictly about the shape in general, like not anything regarding hard surface. All right, so there's a lot of stuff to talk about in design, and we're definitely not going to hit everything today. I think we'll probably dedicate a little bit of each class to talking a bit more about different concepts, because there's a lot, but today I think we did a pretty decent job of covering at least the basic idea of evenness, hierarchy, contrast, and a little bit of shapes. Like there's a lot more that goes into shapes than just avoiding evenness. But I think it's a good start. So what do you guys think? Is there anything else you guys have questions on before we wrap up our bit of design today? Do you guys feel like this was a good bit of knowledge for design? Like, did you think it gave you a good foundation to kind of learn a little bit deeper into design? And also, I just want to point out, I don't expect anyone to get all of this right away. And it's a process that takes a very long time. Like, learning to avoid these things will probably be a lifetime, because it's very deep. Like someone said once, design is a lifelong learning thing. That's probably the worst paraphrase I've ever heard, but yeah. Everyone's asking for some design resources. I have a few. I have way less than you think. So, and that's why I highly say the best way to learn, in my opinion, at least to me, is through critique and feedback and asking questions. You know, like if you have a question about something, like for me, it was super important. Like I'd be like, okay, I like this. Why? Why do I like it? If you can't answer at least part of that question, like if you can't say, I like that these aren't even, I like the way that this form transitions. If you're just like, oh, it has a cool shape, like, okay, what's a cool shape? Or if you're like, oh, this is busy, why is it busy? You know, I'm going to segue for a second and talk about vocabulary, but one of the most important things I feel like I'm hoping to teach you guys is a basic design vocabulary. Because the thing is, anyone can look at something and say, oh, that's busy. That doesn't really help people unless they know design. Because while you can ascertain why it's busy, can you tell me why exactly it's busy? Are you going to tell me, okay, those panels are even, so they all look like they have the same importance? Or these details are sandwiching and they're all even here. You know, evenness is usually the cause of busyness because it lacks contrast and it lacks hierarchy, right? Like, or busyness, I mean. If you say something is busy, it means you don't understand it because it's just the same intensity everywhere. But you need to be able to break that down, right? So the tools that I'm giving and I'm hoping to give with this vocabulary is like, you don't just look at something and say, oh, like, why do I like this? Like, I want you to have the tools to be like, I like this because of this, and I understand why it pleases me, or I understand why I don't like this. And it takes time, right? Like learning to see evenness is one thing, but now you have to learn how to implement it. And it's going to be like this with every single thing. You know, if you're like, okay, I know how to see echoing. Okay, but how do I implement echoing into my design? How do I implement balance into my design? What is balance? What is form? What makes a good form versus a bad form? You know, it's exploration and asking yourself these questions and learning how to break it down with words, I feel, because words give you tools to troubleshoot something, right? If you're like, this isn't working, and you just sit there and you're like, it doesn't feel right. Okay, well, if I give you words to know why it doesn't feel right, it'll at least allow you to have a framework to start figuring out why it doesn't feel right, you know? Hopefully that makes sense, but I think that's the most important thing. And like, just because you know the word 70-30 doesn't mean you're gonna do it and that you actually understand. You know, there's a difference between understanding and doing it subconsciously. So hopefully that's a helpful explanation of learning to design. How do I say your name? Is it Lewis? All right. How much of design freedom can you have on your everyday job at 343 or as an environment artist while you work at a studio? I think it depends on what your position is and who you are and what you're working on. I designed basically everything I made on Halo 5. I would say that that's highly unusual, but you know, it just really depends. Maybe it's not, I don't know. I think it's unusual. And for the most part, I mean, like you have to work within constraints, right? You're like, okay, well, the level designer wants this, so I need to make it fit for them. But you can have as much freedom as you want as long as it fits the end goal. You know, like on Halo 5, I got to pretty much design the entire end of the game. You know, I designed how these things would open. I designed the look of them. I designed the exterior building for the cinematic, and I figured all of this out on my own. But then there were certain design things like, okay, well, we want the player to feel like they're walking up this thing to kind of signify the challenge of reaching their goal. And we want to have contrast between the back of the room and the front of the room. But overall, like it was pretty much up to me how it looked and what it felt like. You know, same thing here, but this one's much more complex because it's a multiplayer map, so there's a ton of like variables and restrictions. But as far as a lot of stuff, I still had freedom. Like this was for a cinematic. I had like 5 days to kit bash and model this thing, and I pretty much had freedom except for the fact that certain parts of the shape because the exterior was already made that I had to follow roughly, like the giant ring shape of it all. So again, I think it's very situational, you know, like this one, I designed and modeled all of this and rigged and animated it, but where it had to go and what I had to do was kind of established. And then it got used again. So I think it very much depends on where you're working and your position. All right. So we've spent quite a bit of time talking about very basic stuff in design. You guys, I'm assuming, would like to get, oh, actually, wait, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. You guys wanted some design stuff. So here's a Facebook group me and my coworker Jahoon run. Well, it's his group, but he and I post in it. And basically, it's just got a lot of critique and feedback on these principles, and talks a lot about, you know, how to fix a lot of these things. So you'll find a lot of common themes. He also has a design site, but the reason why I feel like there's not a ton of stuff is that it's hard to find stuff on the abstract, and that's kind of why I think that there are books that are helpful, but when it comes to pure abstraction of it without context, I find it's hard to find any design books on that. And so, yeah, let me link to another one, Form, Space, and Order. So Form, Space, and Order is a book that I like a lot. It's an architecture book, but it has a ton of really important examples of hierarchy and just tons of other little stuff, like tons of little things. And you know, I read through a bit of this book and I took a lot of notes, and I just tried to study them like every day for a while and restudy them so that I could kind of commit them to memory and learn to see them in everyday life. But I think this is a really great book. And architecture, while it's not always important, like there's stuff in here that is important to design independent of architecture. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good book. So I recommend that one. And if I find any other great references, I will show you guys. So how's everyone feeling? Do you guys want to get into the research and getting a blockout started in Max? Anybody have any other questions or anything at all about anything ever anyways? At all? About anything? All right, you guys seem pretty eager. All right. So, all right, let's just get right into it. I'll be honest, I haven't really thought too much about it because I kind of want to just wing it, which is usually how I do it. Like, it's good to think about stuff, but I find that for me personally, like, I'll usually get a few ideas in my head, and that's all I need to get started, and I like to solve the rest during the process. So I actually don't know what this gun's gonna look like. I made this horrible, horrible sketch. And for the record, a lot of my guns start out like this sometimes, and it's just like literally the most basic whatever stuff. Nothing's really figured out, and it's all gonna change. But for me, I really struggle with getting an idea on the page because I'm very perfectionist about stuff. And so like starting somewhere I think is the most important for me. So even if it's not great, just having something. Let me rotate this guy. But this is probably what I'm gonna start my base off of. And in my head, I see a lot more to it than this, you know. And just to point out so you guys don't think I'm crazy, during the last class, I started with this, and everyone thought I was insane, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is going to be horrible." And I'm not like bragging or saying it's the best thing ever, but I feel like stuff doesn't always start out great, right? Like it has to start somewhere, and so it's just about getting that somewhere started, and you know, getting to that final result. So this is roughly how this is going to go. You know, it's going to start out looking pretty rough, and we're going to refine it, and we're going to find the design. And you'll see how it ties into my workflow also, because it's definitely going to start out pretty rough. Yeah, so some things that I was thinking about with this, like one thing that I'm really passionate about is I like things that are different, and I try to do different stuff than I've seen before. You know, like if I see a shape, I try not to copy shapes consciously. Like I'm not like, oh, I like that shape, I'm gonna copy it. Like I feel like if you want to stand out as a designer or an artist, like that's cool sometimes, but I think it's very important to try and find your own unique look. Like, you know, for example, Vitaly Bulgarov has tons of really sick shapes and details, and I love them. Like, I think that they're amazing, and I'm really inspired by them. But I don't want to copy them because I don't want people to be like, oh, that's Vitaly's shape. Like, I want to find my own shapes so that someone's like, oh, that's Alex's shape, you know? Or like, for example, Ghost in the Shell has that 3-dot shape and other shapes. And so there are some shapes that are fairly universal, like capsules and, you know, dots, and there's all sorts of those, but then there's signature shapes, right? Like Vitaly has that one capsule with a circle in it, and I've seen so many people use that shape. So I really want to stress that, like, don't copy what other people have done. Like, it's fine to do studies, but like, be your own artist. Find your own voice in art and design. Like, it is harder to try and always do that, but you're always going to end up being influenced by people regardless of if you want to or not. And so it's just like, yeah, sorry, let me answer the questions. They pop up and it like derails my brain, which is fine. That's my problem. Kane said, did you use the alligator as rough for that gun? No, I didn't, but I did after I realized it looked like one. It was literally an accident. Because I was like, oh, these teeth look like an alligator. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going to add scales, and I'm going to find a way to make it work, or try to. Because I just really wanted to do it because I felt like it was weird. But yeah. Yeah, I can give you an example. So, for example, and I also, you know, feel free to stop me if I get too much into the design side of stuff, because this is also a modeling class. And I get really into the design side. Like, I could talk about this stuff for probably ever, unless someone told me to shut up. But let me find that one super iconic shape that I've seen on so many people's things on ArtStation. Like, for example, and this isn't it, but like, if someone made this shape, and Vitaly does this shape a lot, if someone made this exact shape, you would instantly know, right? But then there's certain shapes, like a capsule shape, David, that are like this. Like, this is a really great capsule. I'm drawing this with my mouse. But yeah, this is a capsule shape, you know, like circle shapes, like the rectangle with the notch in it or whatever. Such a beautiful drawing. Like, there's certain shapes that are very generic and that no one can really own, I feel like. But the more complex your shape gets, like, let me find that one shape, because I swear I see this one everywhere. Like, I can't go anywhere without seeing it. It's so old, so far back. All right, this shape right here. Do you guys see these little capsules with the circle in it? Vitaly uses this shape everywhere. At least he used to. And I just remember after he posted that, I saw so many people use that shape. It was just like, I saw it everywhere, and I still see it. Yeah. So I'm not saying like, oh, you shouldn't do that, but for me personally, like, I want to try and do something new. I'm not saying that I always do, but I just think it's important to try and keep that in mind. Like, how directly you're copying someone versus how much you're pushing your own style and your own look. You know, it's harder for sure. Like, it's really hard. Finding your style, finding something unique is incredibly challenging. And I think that we can always be better at it. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Was I answering a question? Because I don't remember why I started talking about that. Like I said, I ramble, so I'm sorry. And I need to get into the design aspect and the ideation. But anyway, I don't remember why I was talking about that, but hopefully someone finds that helpful. Yeah, like be a different artist. Like, be yourself. Don't take someone's design and just like copy it. Like, try and avoid that as much as you can. Like, if you know, oh, this looks like someone else's, like, then why are you doing it? It's already been done. And if you don't do it better than that person, then you're just copying it poorly. You know, like, what's the point in that? You know, as an artist or as a person, like, art is so cool. Like, when you think about this, and I swear I'm gonna get into everything after I give this little rant, but it's so fascinating to me. Like, as an artist, you have the ability, or a writer, or, you know, something that gets an idea out. You have the ability to change the world in some small way, right? Like, you think about, for example, Star Trek, right? Let's say that it was 100 years ago, and no one had ever thought of the idea of teleportation or a teleporter. It took an artist and a writer bringing that to a TV screen, and all of a sudden, people say, like, wow, we should work towards making a teleporter. How do we make this a reality? You know, same thing with a lot of technology in sci-fi, and that's what I find so fascinating with it. Like, you have the ability to create things that don't exist that can help influence the future. And that's what's so cool about it to me. And so it's like, if you're not going to be making new ideas, you're not adding your voice to anything, you know? And it's not saying, oh, because I made something, I changed the world, but it's just, I find it important that, like, you're adding your own voice and that you have something to say. And, you know, who knows what that is? Like, maybe you just want to do something just because. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Everyone does art for different reasons, but it is cool to know, though, that being an artist or a writer or some kind of like idea creator, that you can contribute to something in some kind of way, you know, and maybe one day hopefully influence the future. And that's, I think, interesting to me, because I feel like a lot of sci-fi did that for me, you know, like, it showed me the things that could be possible in the future, and I was always fascinated by that. So anyway, that's my little rant on it. But I just think that find your voice as an artist, and especially if you want to be a designer, right? Like, if someone's looking for a designer and they're like, oh, I've seen this before, the chances of them wanting you for your style is so much less, you know? So anyway, all right, let's get into this. And are you guys ready to start this? Yeah, I'm sure you are. All right. So I have this basic idea for a gun. I don't really know what the shapes are going to be. I think it looks like poop right now. It's just some weird sketch. But like I mentioned, like, it's a place to start. And that's really what matters more to me, because we're going to change this thing like crazy. It's not even going to be the same sketch. But that's going to happen in 3D. But it gives me kind of a direction to block out. And so you can see I wrote down some things like light ergonomics, energy based with magazine, maybe energy pucks. So, like, I like the idea that while it's energy based, maybe it has batteries in a magazine, or some kind of thing like that. You know, like Half-Life 2 had that gun that would shoot those energy pucks by punching them, and they would spit it out. I thought that was super cool. And so I remember when I was talking about this, like, I find if you're making a sci-fi gun, try and find an idea that's unique or a shape that's unique. Give your gun something that makes it stand out, like, or try to at the very least. And so when I think about, for example, how you reload a gun, like, maybe come up with a new way to do that. Maybe come up with a new style or look to it, not just, oh, I shoved in a magazine. Like, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But, like, I've always been really inspired by the Call of Duty guns, where they'll open up in the middle, or maybe they have something that goes on the side. Like, I saw that in Destiny. And let me bring some of those guns up. Like, what's it called? COD Infinite Warfare. And I know people have opinions on this game quite strongly, but I think it has a lot of good art in it as far as like characters and weapons, even if they're not entirely realistic, but they have interesting ideas that I think you can take from them. So like, for example, this magazine, right? Like, how that thing reloads, I think that's pretty cool. And I don't really see a reason why that would be necessarily a bad thing, you know, like maybe it's a gun that can shoot energy and it also shoots something else, and so that's what's in the handle, or maybe there's some kind of tech in the handle that serves a different function. But I just like the idea of forms and shapes and function that, while familiar, kind of break the mold, because that's going to make it stand out, right? Like, if this gun didn't reload from the back, you'd just be like, oh, it's a Glock. Like, it's an energy Glock. Like, okay. It's not really interesting, I feel like. That's not to say it's not, but it doesn't stand out, you know? So that's one thing I feel like a lot of these guns did do well, regardless of believable function. Like, I love that, like how you reload it in the back. It's interesting, right? You've never seen it before. Let me see. And I mean, there are things that I don't like on certain guns, especially things that make it look a little ridiculous or unbelievable, like this one, how it has like the cables on the outside. But if you look at the overall aesthetics of it, like maybe it's some future manufacturing process that gives it this look, or maybe there's a reason that this material looks like this in the future. Like maybe there's a benefit to it. On top of it, I've never seen it before. I think it's kind of interesting. And it's a little weird too. Or like there's this one shotgun in here. Oh, I love this one. But there's a shotgun where you like cock the entire front of the gun. And it's kind of ridiculous, but I think it's still pretty interesting. So I really like this next gun though. I think it's really simple, but unique looking, right? It's like two guns that separate, and it's an energy weapon, but it feels very manufactured and real world. And it has the back reloading magazine. You know, kind of like a P90, but it's elevating the function of it. And I'm not saying that this is 100% believable, but it is interesting that it can separate into two guns, and it shows that someone put a little bit more thought into the function of it than doing what's been done. And that's really what I appreciate about it. Yeah, this is the gun that you cock the whole front of it. You know, this one has the P90 mag, but it's a bit more translucent, and it's got that cool manufactured look with the colors that kind of separate it, right? Like you've never seen these warm tones that are almost gold on a gun, I feel like, and a lot of these cutout shapes. Let's see. And then I want to go to probably my favorite. Oh wait, this one's pretty cool. So this one has this energy magazine. And so it has these little energy batteries that it cycles through. Yeah, thanks for the Ryzen link. I'll take a look in a sec. All right, let me go to one of my favorite guns though. Slightly controversial, but I think it's probably one of my favorite things in the world. I know it's not believable in a lot of ways, but like, I love this gun. The fact that it opens up and it has all these pucks that emit energy, and it's a shotgun, and then the animation to it is so cool to me. I absolutely love that. And I also love this one a ton. I love that it has these like different shaped barrels that glow. I think that's really fascinating. But yeah, like, I also like how this one animates. So, point is, I think that's something I want to try and push with my gun, and I don't necessarily know what that's going to be yet, but I do want to try and find something similar, and by similar I mean something interesting and unique, hopefully. So I had ideas for, like, maybe it would open up forwards, maybe it would open sideways. Like, I don't have a webcam, so I can't really show, but like if you split the gun open and spit out the magazine, you shove a new one in, and then you split it horizontally back together. But yeah, so let me read these questions. There's a number of Destiny guns that look like prototypes, or gun manufacturers only partially finish the gun, gives character. Yes, I agree with you. I think that's also a good example of archetyping. Like, when you're designing, thinking about, like, okay, this is a prototype, this is like a final gun, and so that context will tweak your design in the end. Alex says, 2 questions. How important is rigging and animation knowledge in weapon design in a production environment? So I think like if you have a small team and that's part of your job description, then I would say it's important. I think rigging guns is pretty easy. I mean, I think it depends on your what you're making. Like, if you're making just a realistic gun, you know, you might not have to rig it, but if you can think about, sorry, I'm trying to do 2 things at once, so it doesn't work. So when you're in a production environment and you're making a gun, let's say you don't rig it, you'll still have to think, okay, well, the barrel's going to open, or the breech is going to open, and when you cock it, someone's going to be able to see inside of there, so you need a model in there. The bullet might have to be animated going out of the magazine, because you might see that and going into the barrel, so you might have to model that, right? Like, knowing how to break the pieces apart with animation in mind is crucial. You know, think about how it's going to be animated and model accordingly. When in the modeling process, do you implement believable functionality, like the back of the magazine reloading and moving parts that require moving parts that require motion and specific clearances? Yes, I do. I think that's what the blockout phase is for. And you might not get it right away, like you might not know what it is, but you want to find out those functional things. Yeah. So here's just a quick example of one of my guns that I have rigged. And, you know, I don't think you could put this rig into an engine because it's just using parenting. But let me animate this real quick. And so basically when I was modeling this, right, like I'm thinking, okay, well, these things are going to open up and let out energy. I'm thinking about how that's going to work. I'm thinking, okay, how is this front piece going to pivot open when it reloads? Where does the magazine inject into? So I've got like this area in here. And then, you know, the trigger needs to animate too because someone's going to pull it. And then I'm also thinking about, like, I think that was about all of it. But yeah, and then to rig it, I just dummied all these groups to these, or I parented them to these dummy objects and animated the dummy objects. I would say that I have a very minimal and basic understanding of rigging, and I would not be somebody you want to ask for rigging advice at all, ever. Unless it's like very basic mechanical stuff. All right. So, starting to get a little hungry. Let's get into this. So, I already had kind of idea in my head. You know, my last gun I made for the class was insanely complicated and probably the most complicated model I've made. And I don't want to do that again because it was just simply too much work. But I really wanted to do it last class. So this one, I want to kind of make it a little more simple, but I want to be able to much clearly more clearly illustrate certain design aspects of things. The thing that I think this one did, though, that was really nice is it gave a lot of individual examples of these design principles. So like on a small scale, I would repeat the same thing over and over. So my goal for this is to give it enough detail that I give you guys enough examples of me applying this theory and explaining how I'm thinking about stuff. But I do want it to be more believable. So I pulled up some refs of things that I'm kind of interested in. So let me pull those up for you guys. And, you know, some people like to make more complicated boards than this. Some people really need a lot of reference. I'll be honest, everybody's different. And for whatever reason, my brain is not very good at implementing references. I don't know why. I know that probably sounds very strange, but when I have like a sheet of references, yeah, like if I have too many references, like nothing really happens. I'm just like, I just forget about them. That's probably also why I like prefer slightly more abstract stuff, but I think it also can add to a more unique result. So like I have a rough idea of what I want. Like I love the simplicity of this, but I think it's a little bit too basic for a class. You know, like I could probably model this in like a few hours easily. And I want something that would be very complicated to the point that it at least shows you guys stuff. But I love the white aesthetic and the minimalist aspect of it. So I'm going to try, I feel like I want to try and find a balance between minimalist and sci-fi tech. So these are just some of my refs, you know, Edon. I like a lot of his use of color and shapes and manufacturing techniques, but also simplicity. I want it to be a bit graphic. And so I like a lot of this stuff. I might try and like push breaking the box with some more interesting form changes. I really like this black material with the information on it. I might try and come up with some kind of weird scope. I'm not sure yet. But these are all things I'm going to figure out. And then like these are sensors. So we have IR sensors and other photo sensors and some other sensor. But I like to put sensory stuff into my guns because it's in the future, right? Like someone's going to probably interface with that gun more than on a firing level. Like if you shoot a gun in the future, does it have a neural uplink that automatically connects to your brain? Does it give you information that allows you to elevate your understanding of the situation around you? Does it let you see through walls? Like, what makes this gun function, and how can we come up with more functionality to something that's already been done? And this image really inspired me because I love the dash of color and the value changes. I think it's really cool. This artist, TJ, I believe that is my coworker, and his name is David. It's not? Are you sure? Oh yeah, it is David. Yeah. David, what's his face? David, what's his last name, Tom? I know it. Here, I know where to find it. I'll link his stuff. It's very graphic. Graphic as in violent. Disturbing. His name is... It's not David Lesperance. David Carvalho, or I believe that's how you say it. But I just... he worked at Ready at Dawn, and now he works at 343. But he's got some cool UI stuff. I think it's pretty interesting. All right, so that's just some of my reference. I want to do something more minimal and believable and using more manufacturing techniques. But I also kind of want it to be abstract and have interesting shapes and a little bit of techiness to it. So Yeah, let's see, what other notes did I make? Not that I can read any of my handwriting, by the way. Maybe open sideways, cartridge feet fed. I don't know what that says. I was gonna actually put a Picatinny rail on it, which is something I've never done on my guns because they're usually a little crazier. And yeah, I want it to be ergonomic as well. So I don't have a ton of stuff. Do you guys find that to be an adequate amount of research? Do you guys want a little bit more? I mean, because I feel like a lot of how I think about stuff is I kind of give myself a rough idea and I solve it in 3D. But does anybody have any questions, anything? And also for reference, like some people use mood boards, you know? Like I said, I don't usually want a lot of reference, but that's just me. If you need reference and you like reference, then go for it. All right, let's do it. So today we're probably not going to get to problem solving. We're just going to dedicate the end of this lesson to getting something on the page. So like you saw with the alligator gun, it's very, very rough, right? Like there's not much to it at the block out. It's very hard to see the final. And so that's where we're going to get to today. We're going to probably get to a state that's like this or like this. I don't even know if we'll get to this stage yet, but we're going to go pretty fast and just get something on the page based on my sketch. And it's going to look pretty rough. So let's see, for length, because in Keyshot, which is thinking forward, Keyshot materials use actual scale. So you want to kind of model it roughly accurate. Let's do length of M4. It's going to get an overall kind of, actually, let's see, what's the length of the gun I want? What's a bullpup gun? That's good. And let's do the AUG. Length of AUG. 31 inches it looks like. So let's just do 31. I'm not going to stick to this either, but I want to have the size be somewhat relative so I can just change it afterward or somewhat like defined. I'm going to be going for more of like a bullpup rifle slash just more of a rifle than a submachine gun. Somewhere in the middle probably. And it's going to be an energy weapon as well. So let me find the other length of this gun, or width, or height, or whatever. Length, width, height. That's the weight. It's about 10 inches to the top, about 30. All right, so we'll just do like 11 inches for now. So that's just to give us a rough scale. So I just kind of actually, before I get too far into this, what is everybody's proficiency in 3D? I kind of want to, I want to get to know you guys so I can kind of like understand where everyone's at, you know, at least with poly modeling. So if you guys could just comment in the chat kind of like where you're at, what you're trying to learn. Yeah, if you guys could type like where you're at with modeling and what you're trying to learn, that'd be really helpful. Like intermediate, beginner, advanced. I mean, it's okay if you don't want to, but it would help me so I can kind of know my audience a little bit better. Yeah, we'll definitely cover compound shapes, Alex. And is anyone here a concept artist? Yeah, Sam will definitely take a basic shape to a refined one. That'll be part of the homework of this class. Graduate school 3 years ago, not do much concept at all. And how much of you guys would say that you want to do concept art or at least learn design? And how many of you are interested in that side of things? And is anyone here an actual concept artist? Yeah, Tam is. Because last class I had Samuel Aaron Whitehead, and he was pretty good. Just want to do nice things, so I guess I'm interested in concept art. Awesome. Yeah, and I just want to say, like, no matter who you are, the more your art skills are good, like the more you work on your art skills, the more valuable you'll be over the next 3D artist. I guarantee you this so much. Like, the better you are at art skills, the more valuable you are, the more money you can ask, like all of these things. So even if you just want to do 3D art, like, understand art philosophy and theories, and it will take you very far. Because if two people can model, but one can model something better because they understand design, they're probably going to get the job. And they're probably going to get paid more. And I find that the best 3D artists know a lot of artistic stuff. So, all right, cool. So it seems like most people are intermediate, even though I know not everybody replied. So let's just start with a shape, and actually let's make a plane and just kind of get that poor drawing in here. Also, I have a lot of hotkeys, and so feel free to ask anything. You know, I'll give a lot of my hotkeys out, and I'll show you guys all of that stuff. All right, let's find my background. So we're gonna just name this background. I'm using the Max Slate editor. Also, a lot of these things are gonna apply to Maya or whatever you use. So let's do diffuse. Let's get this this shameful drawing up here. We go in realistic materials with mattes. We can see our texture in the viewport, and that's under standard materials, realistic materials with maps. All right. Before we do anything, I'm going to make a few materials to model with, just to get started, and this is pretty important, I think, because I like to have pretty materials when I model, and I also like materials that help inform things like value, type of texture, or like how I'm going to model it. So like I model rubber softer than I model metal, for example. And you know, you want to think about those things. And so having a rubber material will help. So I like to have a high spec material because it makes it easier to see your smoothing and the smoothing errors you're going to have in your overall shading and forms. So let's just make like a neutralish metal, and we're going to call this, rename, we're just going to call this metal mid, because it's medium value. We'll do a metal bright. We're just going to make this a bit brighter in the diffuse. Let's do a metal, metal dark. So I think having 3 values is more than enough for metal. And maybe we'll change the glossiness. And all these materials are going to get tweaked heavily later on, but for now I just like to have something in. Makes it easier to model. Now let's do a rubber. Let's drag another standard. I'll call this rubber A. Let's make this darker, a little bit less spec. And a little bit less gloss. It's a bit softer of a highlight. That's probably a bit too dark. It'll get hard to read. A little less spec. Then let's do like a hard plastic. You don't have to think this in depth about it, but it's good to have different values, right? Like when you're modeling, you want to know like what's going to be dark, what's going to be bright, and I think that's really the most important. So let's do just like a white plastic that's a bit rough. So it has some spec, enough spec that we can see the forms because we have highlights, but not enough that it confuses itself with metal. Let's just name this guy white plastic. Name this one dark plastic. But it just helps because later on when you're making these things, like to kind of know roughly what you're going to do when you render it in the modeling stage helps you to make a more informed decision. And we're going to call this gray plastic. And then let's do a nice colorful one because we want to get a color, and we'll just call this color. We don't really know what it's going to be yet. But you can tell by like all of my projects that I care very heavily about viewport colors when I'm modeling. Not only because I think it's pretty to look at and gets me more excited, but it helps me to kind of know the value breakup and how the materials are going to look. So these are just my viewport materials. All right, color, and let's just make this one some kind of pretty teal for now, or I don't know, greenish, a little bit more shiny, less glossy. And we'll make a glass. We're almost done. So this will just make it the whole process easier in the end. We'll do a glass. Let's just take the opacity, lower that to like 25. Get rid of the color. Add specularity. So it's reflective. And let's call this glass. Glass or clear plastic. We'll do clear plastic. Clear plastic. Sorry if this is too exciting for you guys. I know it's very, very exciting to watch me make materials. All right, now so self-illumination. We're gonna make a light. Let's just do yellow. And we can actually use the specular color to add some like highlight to it. So it looks like the light has a fall off, just a tad. But it's very subtle. All right, and where's the color? What's that? So we're probably not going to use all of these, but we have a good base to work with from the beginning, and so we probably won't have to struggle too much to get this figured out later. So this is just a very good place to start, I feel like. We got all these nice big balls here with all these colors on them. But yeah, so before I move on, I just want to say, like, it's important to do this just because, you know, dark values and light values are important to distinguish between during the modeling process. So I'm going to go hide this over here in a second. And I like to keep them all nice and orderly so it's more fun to work with. Feel free to use the compact material editor if you like, but I always like to do this when I start a project. And the dream goal is eventually, when I make a big keyshot library, I want to actually make 3ds Max materials that correspond to every one of them. And I want to be able to preview them in Max. So that would be a big project. I'm going to work towards something like that. All right, and before we continue, let's avoid any big mistakes. And let's save this scene. Let's call this working files. All right, we'll call this cool guy. No, that's not cool enough. Gun. Gun 1, whatever. Class gun 2. Class gun 2, 1. Yeah. All right, cool. So let's get started. I assigned material to this plane, and I'm just going to start from a plane and kind of draw out the shapes real basic, so I can kind of get an understanding. This is clearly not drawn flat on, but that's cool with me. I don't really mind. If you press G, you can hide your grid in Max. Also, just want to say, I can model a bit in Blender. I can model a bit in Maya, although Maya, not as much anymore now that it's been changed so much since 2015. And a lot of modeling principles are applicable to most softwares. So just because I use Max doesn't mean you shouldn't ask me those questions if you feel like you need them answered. I'm going to put this plane behind here because remember, this was the plane that we used to determine the size of this object. And so I want the front one to just be the one I start with, but I want to keep my size reference. In fact, I'm going to open up this measure panel under utilities. I'm just going to keep it floating over here so I have something to think about. And it kind of gives you the dimensions, right? Like length, width, height. Cool. All right, let's actually get started. Like I said, we're just kind of trying to get something on the page. So I'm going to use the Swift Flip tool, start manipulating this, thinking about the shapes of the gun. And we're not going to get anything perfect right now, but we just want to have something that's at least a little bit 3D. And you're always going to start off, you know, I don't know what you guys are doing right now, but it's always going to start off and you're going to be a little unsure of yourself, like, you know, where is this going? And like, honestly, I have no idea how this is going to turn out. When I made my last one, and pretty much everything you make, like, I find that you can get better at it, making stuff, but there's always going to be that, like, that not fear, but like that question, like, can I do it again? Is it going to be good enough? You know, it's okay to feel like that. I think one thing a lot of people don't realize is, like, it's hard to make something that you like, and it's not easy. And one thing I want to stress in this class is, like, don't give up just because you make something that you're not happy with. Like, figure out how to fix it. And really enjoy not necessarily enjoy the process. I don't always enjoy it, but one thing I just want to convey to you guys is, like, It's okay to make mistakes. Like, this isn't going to be perfect right away. So, and I'm going to mess up and I'm going to have to redo parts that I'm not happy with, and that's okay. Like, I just want to make it clear, like, don't always act like you know what you're doing. Like, while that can give people confidence, it's about finding it. It's not about thinking you know where you're going all the time. And it's okay to make mistakes, It's okay to explore ideas. Like my friend Shang, who's a really good artist, he once said to me, because I'm kind of a perfectionist, he said, like, get the bad ideas out. And so a lot of times, I know a lot of people will do this, where they'll just get stuck in an idea and they're like, it's not good enough, I'm not happy. And so, yeah, like, it can make it hard to wanna make something when you feel like that. The rough thickness down. Guns are usually a lot thinner, or yeah, they're like a lot thinner than people usually, I think, perceive them to be. And so they usually make very thick guns. Their guns are actually incredibly thin. Like, I think an AR is a little over an inch thick. And so a lot of people will just overdo that. Let's make sure this is centered. And I like to use the align tool. So the align tool is up here. And what I'll do is, now that I have this centered on the grid, I have it hotkeyed actually. And so I use the align tool to quickly align it on the y-axis. And so you can see now it's perfectly aligned to my gun. All right. It's looking a little bit thick. We're going to definitely add volume to it, but much later on. One of the things that I think I'm really going to want to do, though, with this gun is have really cool negative space. So like these shapes in here, that's where I think I'm going to focus most of my time, because I get a lot of excitement out of negative shapes. So I'm just thinking functionally. Let's start adding just like placeholders for the most important parts of the gun, and getting rid of topology that we don't need just yet. So, for example, I want to keep changing this front shape. So I'm just going to delete these extra edges here and make a big end-on. So now I can move this back up. I think this material is a bit crazy for our side view, so I'm just going to put white plastic on it and tone that down a bit. Make it a bit more gray. One other thing I wanted to have up here is, like, you can kind of see it, but I want a counter angle. Just make a box and align that. We have to reset the pivot. So I have on my quad menu, I have a bunch of tools I use a lot. So like Pro Boolean, Regularize Loop, Array, Mirror, and Center Pivot. So I just have that on there. I just kind of want to get this counter angle to this dominant angle that I'm looking at. I was thinking about having this piece be pretty rounded. I'm not sure yet, because I feel like it makes it look a little bit like a fish gun, which I don't really like, but who knows. So in this stage, while I'm being a little messy with my topology, everything is flat. So keep stuff flat, like there's nothing non-planar on here.
Hey Alex, Kane's asking, what is that menu called?
Sorry, that's called the quad menu. So if you right-click in Max, it will open up. If you go to Customize User Interface in Max, it will pull itself up. So let me show you that. So if we go to Quads, you can customize it. So you can click like one of these squares, and you can drag over from here these tools that you want. Also, I have incremental save on, so when I press Control-Shift-S, it goes to Gun 02, and I'll have like 500 save files by the time I'm done with something. So I was trying to think about different features I want for this gun. Like, I thought about having one that was closed loop like this, so it has the shapes and it has just like a full frame around it. I also thought about a more skeletal one yesterday. In my head, it just kind of popped up, but I don't know. But we're gonna figure this out. And we're gonna get some cool looking shapes. It's just gonna take a little bit. So let's think about where the hand is gonna go. So I'm just gonna draw out a rough grip box. Make it a little wider than the gun, because I don't want to cut anything into the gun just yet. I want to kind of figure out the gun before I've actually made any modeling choices too much. Let's not waste time. Got that centered on the gun. Let's make it a bit bigger. And if there's any like thing I'm doing right now, anybody ever wants to have questions about. So yeah, we're gonna have to think about this. This is probably gonna be a bolt-up rifle, to be honest. Let me pull something up real quick. So let me find it. Just want to look at this by itself, because I didn't indicate a hand grip or anything. So I was trying to think about where would be the most pleasing place to have this, and also the function of it. So if I do want the gun to split in half, I'll have to kind of design around that, especially where the hand is placed. And I also have to keep in mind like how you would shoulder this and if it's comfortable or not. And so we're going to start thinking about features a little bit. I just want to, not sure yet, not sure. Also, a good point to like keep in mind is like take a lot of time on your blockouts. Like this stage that we're in right now is the very most important stage. If you don't get cool shapes during this stage and you don't start getting what you want during this stage, the rest of it's going to just be very challenging, you know, like I showed here, like the very start of blockout, I had most of the shapes. And sometimes those are hard to find, sometimes they're not. But yeah, like a lot of people love to rush forward and they're like, oh, I just want to get it done. But the more you rush forward, the worse the foundation is you're going to build it on. Like you wouldn't build a house on a bad foundation, so why would you build a design on one, you know? Also, I'm trying to re-engage my brain. I haven't modeled in like a month, except at work, so I apologize. All right, so the hand's gonna go there. Yeah, let's do what somebody had asked earlier. Let's make a biped. I think we need a biped to solve this. So remember, it's a problem-solving process. It's not a process of just knowing everything. You know, it's a question and answer, and solving issues. Height, inches. God, how many inches am I tall? I feel really stupid right now. I'm sorry. Feet, 2 inches. My brain is way too tired to think with numbers. 5, 9, 12. So I'm like 69 inches. That's awesome. That's the ultimate number of height inches to have, they say. And since we base this on an AUG, it'll give us a somewhat accurate just pose this guy real quick. Somewhat accurate real world scale. I don't want the greatest pose in the world, but I want something that's like useful. This guy. For some reason, I can't select the base, so got to do it through the outliner. I'm just kind of picturing in my head how it is when I hold the gun. And actually I have some, and so I would actually do this a lot. Like I'd go pick up my guns and I'd think about like, how am I gonna hold this? Like how do I interact with this? Like what do I think of this? I found it was actually extremely helpful. All right, so I'm doing it right now. Just trying to picture it. What I'm really just looking for is like where does the front hand connect and where does the back one connect? So I can get a rough idea of that. I can just rotate this. Let's switch to local. Okay. There we go. Okay. This is a really great pose. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Yeah, no, dude, 10 out of 10. IGN. Please give me money on my Patreon. Thank you. Sorry, I'm getting really tired, so I'm trying to remember what this stuff is. All right, gotta select that biped again. Just move it, because I don't want to move the gun because it's at the origin. Let me look at someone in a gun pose, because I'm sitting, so I can't really do it with my body. Rifle stance. Yep, just like that. All right. Why does he have it there? It's on his pec. What a goober. All right, let's twist that pelvis a bit. Let's get this leg back. Get this foot doing stuff. He's like, yeah, I hold guns. I'm real cool. Let's twist the back a little bit. Wait, yeah, that's a good dance. It's a pretty good dance. All right. So this isn't the best, but I'm not too worried. I just want to get a rough idea. My arm would be out more. So this is actually probably a pretty good place because I think I'm going to split the rifle down the middle if it opens. So let's I feel like having this open in the background is going to do more harm than good. I'm going to put this on a separate layer, and we're going to start making layers for this stuff. All right, so I open my layer editor, and this is all part of setting up your scene. So what I like to do is create a layer, and we're going to call this trash. So everything that we don't like, everything that's bad, we throw it in here. This trash, it's garbage. We don't need it. And we're going to make a layer here called dude. So we know where the dude is. And we're just going to keep layer 0 for now. But I want this size reference, but I don't really need it anymore. So we're going to take this guy and throw it in the trash. God, I really dislike the new scene thing for Max a lot. Or I hate how you have to add stuff. Oh, I froze it. I didn't even know. All right, cool. Add this to trash. New parent, pick, cool. And we're going to hide trash. So whenever we hide something, or we add it to trash, it'll just go away forever. Well, until we unhide it. Get your neck down there. You look like a dork. What are you doing? Yeah. See, look how mean he looks. He looks pretty upset. He's pretty pissed. All right, cool. So we have a rough dude in there. We have half a gun, and we have our handle. So I think at this point, you know what? Let's do some paint overs. There's no reason not to. So let's just take some screenshots with our good old friend snipping tool. One of the worst screen capture softwares you can own, but luckily it's free. And a quick tip, if you copy that to your clipboard and you hit new, it'll be the exact same size as your clip. So let me hook up my tablet, and I'm going to draw for a little bit. And I think after that we should probably call it good here. We took quite a while on the design side of stuff, but I think what I'd like everyone to do for homework is, if you guys could just get something into your 3D program of choice. Get your basic reference sorted, find the basic idea that you want to go for, and any concept drawings or any other like ideation you want to do to build upon that is totally up to you, but it would definitely go a long way. So let me pull my wacom tablet cable. I gotta plug it in again. Cool. So how's everybody holding up? How are things while I get this adjusted? Yeah, it's cool. I'm glad. Oh man. Awesome. Glad to hear it. All right, so quick tip for paint overs that I like to do is I like to go to here and I go to levels, and if I just get rid of the dark values, it helps to kind of make any marks you add stand out more. So I like to do black, and so it'll just make the black pen stand out over everything else. got my square brush here. And actually, I'm going to do a side view as well. And I think after we get this drawing done, we're going to probably end the class. So let's hide this guy for the moment. We've got this nice questionable looking weapon. This blank slate of confusion. But we will make something come from it. Let's make a new one. Yeah, I just want to remind you guys, like I said, you know, blockouts don't need to be pretty. They just need to help you start getting an idea figured out. And some ideas are harder than others. It really just depends. But approach everything differently, you know. What kind of projects are you guys thinking about doing? I know that Tam had mentioned some of his ideas already to me. He had some pretty cool ideas for a machine gun. So I'm just going to start getting something on a page. The idea isn't right now to have like a final design. I don't like this brush, is too small. Interesting. There's some interesting flows going on there, Jesse. I think, yeah, there's a lot of interlocking shapes in there, which I'll talk about later. But yeah. I kind of like the idea of having like some really strong dominant line that kind of dominates this weapon. That could be interesting. And also, I highly recommend, like, if you don't draw, be very loose about it. Don't try and be perfect. Like, perfect lines can be your enemy, and they can lock you into a specific pathway of thinking, and you're not focusing on the big picture. I'm just going to draw basically my outline so I can start getting the ideas started. And this drawing is not going to be our final design by any means at all, like at all. This is just a starting point, you know, whatever it takes. So like right here, I know I'm making a shape I actually don't like, but it's okay for now. So I'm kind of thinking about how this grip is going to fade into the body. I'm going to soften that bevel and transition it. And I'm just going to think of like a back shape to hollow the gun out. I don't like this proportion though, like I want it to kind of be the same all around, which again, as a time or evenness is actually okay. And I'm definitely not keeping this design, but that group is thick as hell and not what we want. Also, then it starts to get sandwiching, right? Like So having this front piece be a bit smaller, then we start getting evenness here. But again, we're in the drawing stage, so I'm not too worried. Yeah, what Oris said about like me getting lonely in conversation, like ask me a lot of questions. It really helps me. You know, I think it's hard sometimes to always know what people are looking for when you talk about stuff, right? Like sometimes people want to know other stuff. And yeah, that's a pretty cool start. Got some interesting ideas there. We can definitely, you know, if you have stuff for next class, we can give some feedback during it. But and so I feel like this proportion of this piece to the front one is a little bit similar. So let's tweak this a bit. Wow, my Photoshop is being incredibly slow. I don't know why. Just trying to like find some detail scale, but not too hard. Like I'm not too interested in the details just yet. In fact, I don't even care about the trigger. I'll figure that out in 3D. So if I wanted to make this gun cut in half, what would I have to do? I would need a mechanism here. And I'd also need one or I could have a separation. That could be a little bit sketchy if there's only one mechanism. This eraser sucks. So just kind of playing with some shapes and like thinking a little bit about function. Well, right now I'm trying to think about what shapes would work with. Yeah, I think shapes can take time. Like shapes is a muscle you have to practice. So just kind of take your time and use some of those principles. One quick thing, this is probably going to be a really helpful tip for all of you. One thing a lot of artists do with sci-fi, especially, is they like have random diagonals in all of their guns or their props. Avoid this like the plague. Like it's okay if your diagonals don't match, but like for example, this and this are parallel. This and this are parallel. This is perpendicular almost, and I'm going to match these two diagonals here. This diagonal is matching this one here and this one. Since this is a grip, I have to change their diagonal, but yeah, like this diagonal too, I would match this one over here. So yeah, don't make your diagonals crazy. I know I'm probably going to see a bunch of that, but it's very common occurrence to see that. So I did like, I'm just going to start saving out sketches, and I'm going to copy these layers and then delete the stuff and change it and try new ideas. Because I did kind of like the idea of a round bow to it, but it's just kind of an ugly shape. And so like if I did do it, I would have to do it right. And I'd have to make those forms flow very well and be interesting, which is really challenging. But obviously in this drawing it still looks like a hot mess. But it's not really about, I'm not making this sketch for you guys, right? Like I'm making this for me so that I understand it. So like if I have a rough idea of like how I would do this, that's all that really matters, I think. And I think I want to maybe, if I'm going to actually do that curve, I'm going to have to like echo it and reinforce it pretty well. Also, you can tell that these two spaces are they're even, like this shape and this negative space. So I think I'm going to try and simplify that a bit. But that'll present its own design issues. But it's part of the process. Mm-hmm. Yeah, don't think about details too much. I'm thinking about details a little bit, but that's because I feel like shapes kind of, like I don't have the perfect shapes right away, but I feel like it's a little bit easier for me. I feel like I'm a little bit backwards. Like I like to think in shapes a lot. Some people think more functionally. So one thing I didn't talk about in this is shape contrast. I didn't talk about that when it comes to design, but I'll kind of give you guys a quick tip and go into it later in a different class. But shape contrast is like some shapes, like for example, here I have a rounded edge, here I have a big bevel, and here I have a huge curve, and then I have a point. And the point is basically like, it's really important to make sure that your shapes aren't all hard-edged or all soft or all round. Like, you want to kind of find ways to break it up a bit and have like contrast, right? So some stuff is hard-edged, some is soft, some isn't. And there's more to it than that for sure. Some of it's concave, some of it's convex. That's called shape contrast. And I think it's extremely important as well. You know, think of it like evenness. Like if every single form is hard edged, then it's gonna look pretty similar. And it's not gonna like be very striking. You know, like if you look at cars, all right, we're gonna have to cut this lesson short in like, let's give it another 10 minutes. It's been like 4.5 hours, which is fine. Actually, you guys lost like 30 minutes, and I really apologize for that. Let's look up Toyota truck 2017, because that's the future. It's 2017, bro. All right. Maybe it wasn't 2017. Let's just look up Toyota truck. But something that you'll want to learn about, and we'll talk about later though, is like contrast between soft and hard. And while that is something that plays into like shapes, it also plays into form extremely hard. So like if you look at a lot of product design, especially, I'm not gonna go too crazy into this, but like, for example, some more examples of contrast. This form fades softly into this part, and then it has a nice harsh tip. These two things contrast each other beautifully. And so when you're blending things, like you see here, it's soft, it's faded into this shape, and then it softens, and then it goes from soft to hard, and then it gets extra hard at the top, so they're contrasting each other. Like there's a bit more to it than just intersecting stuff. It's about how do you intersect stuff. You can see shape contrast here, right? Like we have a circle, and a lot of the design other than that is rectangular. And we have these hard edges, and then it's soft on the inside. And so there's a lot of like subtlety and reasons why this is beautiful beyond the fact that it's minimal. You know, like all the diagonals are aligned as well. Like you can see it, like this one, this one, this one. Like that's why this is pleasing, because it goes from soft to sharp and it fades, and it's very interesting. So you can see this in sculpting as well, like what makes good forms in sculpting. A lot of that is the contrast between the hard and the soft. That's why a lot of forms look mushy when people sculpt and when they're first starting out, is they don't know how to get that contrast in there. I don't like any of these details. Just want to delete it all. Do you do soft forms in the blockout or wait till sub D? It's all in the blockout. Like, let me find the image. Well, to a degree, right? So like, for example, here, all right. When I'm blocking out, I think of bevels and softness in terms of design. When you make a bevel that isn't to smooth an edge, so form change, like for example, making this triangular part taper in, or like taper rather than be a hard edge. You can see here, sorry, this is a hard edge, but I smooth it out very early on. And the reason for this is I like to bevel from big to small, because I know that this is a strong bevel that I'm gonna wanna keep in the future. It's part of the design. It's not smoothing. You can see here, I'm fading this in, and then I'm gonna have a hard edge here to contrast it. So I'm planning these things out in my head, and I know how I'm gonna execute it because I've done it before. You can see here, I was like, okay, I know I want this edge to fade in. So I added that bevel already. So I'm planning it out, and this just takes time and practice. But sub D is last. You should have your design form changes in before it's over. I like some of the directionality. There's things I really dislike about this, but it's a bit too rectangular for me as well. So how many people are going to be doing a gun, and how many are going to be doing a prop? Damn. Nice. So it looks like no one's doing guns. That's unfortunate. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm just trying to think of different ideas, like maybe this is some kind of cowl that also doubles as a hand grip. And we could have some like very subtle but complex forms, but who knows?
Got a question from Alex. Says, do you have any thoughts on kit bashing for blockouts?
Honestly, why not? If you want to practice modeling though, I suggest doing everything uniquely. I end up usually kit bashing like 1 or 2 pieces, but that's because I don't have a kit bash library. But I also feel like there is something to be said for like every time you do it, pushing yourself to like do something unique. And I wouldn't use other people's kit bash parts simply because, you know, then you start incorporating their shape language into it instead of finding your own. That's just my opinions on it though. And what we're going to do when we're done with all these shapes is we're going to start to figure out the function. So I'm thinking here maybe the stock could slide backwards. Just an idea. I'm not sure. All right, let's give this like another 5 minutes. We're definitely not going to reach where we want to yet. That's fine. You know, we spent most of the time doing the design stuff, so. So my homework is going to be, I think, for you guys who want to participate, start blocking this stuff out. You know, it's just important to get something on the page more than anything. And then we can kind of go from there. You know, we can get feedback, get something on a page, get a model started, get something. So right now I'm just doing like quick ideas because I think I actually found some interesting ideas. Definitely nowhere near where we want to be, but let's see, like our end result. Do you keep track of all your iterations in this phase and maybe use some for this later? No, I don't, honestly. I kept them just because, you know, maybe I'll find something I liked, I guess, if that counts. Like, but I think for me, I've gotten really used to like throwing stuff away, you know. As my friend coined it, is he's really bad at killing his babies. And like, don't get so attached to something. Don't be like, oh, you know, I really like this thing I did. It's so cool. Like, okay, cool, but like, I'm sure it could be better, no matter what it is. Like, there's something wrong with liking your ideas, but like, be very hard on yourself and judge like, does this work or not? And like, make sure you find stuff that bothers you. And yeah, what was the question again? Yeah, so anyway, maybe I'll use some forms, maybe I won't, but I feel like if I kill the things that I don't like early on, you know, like my friend said, getting the bad ideas out, and I'm sure that the good ideas will follow you through to the final phase. So it just kind of naturally evolves. So I'm thinking here like interlocking form, subtle form change, maybe. I need to fix this stupid typing. It looks hilarious. Why did I have it like this? What was I even doing? Oh, I'm good. Cool. Segoe Pro, let's go. My favorite. All right. So I'm gonna call this this idea, subtle interlocking form. And so what I'm kind of thinking is like, maybe underneath, like this whole thing is, why is Photoshop so slow? I don't understand. I don't get it. All right, well, whatever. So what I'm thinking, and then covering, and so I'm just telling myself, like, I think that this could have some sort of detail underneath it. Like maybe there's some sort of internal pieces that are rectangular, and then you can see this form being influenced on the outside of the cowl, very subtle-like. And so I'm just kind of trying to think about it in a believable way. If the idea comes to me, and like this, for example, adjustable stock. I still have to figure out if I want the gun to crack in half or like how I want it to reload. And chances are I'll just be thinking about it throughout the week, and I'll probably come up with the idea. I'm like, okay, well, all right, so we haven't really figured out what we want to do with the gun yet, which is fine. I suggest you guys to do the same thing. And I think this is a pretty good place to start. You know, we did some sketches. We just got something in Max. And that's really what matters, because once we find the shapes, you know, we've already started. And the hardest part of any project is just starting it, I feel like. And getting over that initial fear, right? Like, don't expect your stuff to be good, but think about the lesson, like the ideas of evenness and the shape information, and just like draw some stuff. But once you've drawn it, critique it. Now look at it and be like, okay, is it even? How can I make it not even? How can I make this shape more interesting? Then start thinking about and doing like line overs, like, okay, well, you know, I want this to do this thing. Like, let me pull up an example. This is an ideation process. So let me pull up something I'm working on for someone, and it's a hover bike. And I basically did this, like I only had 5 minutes, so I did a quick sketch, and I just wrote down like my ideas. Like I got some shape ideas. I was like, okay, here's some ideas: dark forms, contrast, similar shape language. I need to sell the racing idea. You know, that body integrates with the design of the character. I want a cool shape for the thrusters, and I want the bike to be an extension of the rider's armor. You know, so it feels a little more technological. But I had no idea what it's gonna actually look like, but I found some basic stuff. And I just kind of started giving myself a direction to go, you know what I mean? So hopefully that's helpful. Yeah, does anyone have any questions, anything you want to say? I can write out in the chat like the final homework if you guys would still like to have homework. But feel free to ask anything. And I think today we did a pretty long class, so I think it's a pretty good time to call it good. But next class, we're going to go hard into modeling. Cool. I'm glad you found it helpful.
Okay, so I guess that's it, unless there are any further questions.
I'm writing out some homework stuff that if you guys want to do it in the chat, so you just copy and paste it. Any videos on design you can recommend? I'll tell you what, actually there's one thing I forgot to add. Yeah, the callouts are kind of like the outlines I did, like with the lines. So yeah, totally tackle that. Like I said, you know, figure out what works for you. You know, if you ask yourself, don't be like, oh, this looks like shit, I hate it. You know, ask yourself like, all right, it looks like shit, or you like it or not. You know, I'm just saying though, like in a bad situation, like think about this as a problem to solve because you can solve it. You're not gonna always figure this all out right away. It's hard and it takes time. And honestly, I feel like if a project's not hard, you're not learning. Like if you're like, oh, this is easy, then you're probably not growing at all. Sorry, that was kind of not related to what you said, but I just thought that would be helpful information. Any videos you can recommend on design? I don't think so, that I can think of off the top of my head, at least that are, there are videos, but they're mostly on like stuff that I feel like is a bit more contextual, and I don't feel like that is what's important right now. I feel like that stuff is important, but I feel like for this class, if you just focus on shapes for now, it'll give you a better understanding of shapes. So let me write down some homework real quick, because the way that I learned design was purely abstract, and while that means you don't think about function as much, it clears your mind up to focus on shapes more, right? Like the human mind can only focus and think about so many things at once. So if you overly think about function and you're struggling to think of shapes, then stop thinking about the function, figure that out later. But if you try to do two things at once, you're going to end up learning both things poorly. So find cool shapes first. I think it's the most important thing in this class, because you know, if you learn how the visual design stuff in the abstract, after this class, like if you want to go apply that to making a realistic gun design, then you can go ahead and do that. But you don't need me, I don't think, to learn, or like you don't need this class to learn how to make a functional gun. You know what I mean? Like basic function, like can a person hold it? Is it comfortable to hold? Does the iron sights work? Does the scope line up right? Is the stock comfortable? Like those are kind of common sense things, but don't go crazy like just yet, you know. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. So let me write some stuff. Practice seeing design all around you. Study the world. Look for evenness and also look for 70-30 / contrast / hierarchy. I know I spelled that wrong. I literally don't know how to spell that. I'm sorry, and I also don't know how to spell silhouettes, so sue me. And then also, let's see, practicing design, and then start block out in 3D, even if it's super basic. Do iteration and identify callouts. Oh God, identify. And yeah, you could call it contrast, hierarchy, 70-30, the opposite of evenness. So like here, I'll give you an example real quick. Like you can go to the gym and do this. Treadmill. So when I was at the gym, I was talking, I wasn't talking, I was having a discussion with someone about 70-30, and they're like, I don't think people really think about these things, and I don't think that this is actually a thing. I'm like, okay. And I went to the gym, and I started showing him on the treadmills, like, where things are not even. It's like, even if this person didn't consciously think about it, they still did it. And it usually makes things a bit more interesting. So let me find a treadmill that's cool. And this will be my last paint over for the class today. All right, cool. So we got this guy. Just gonna do this real quick. Go into the real world. Look at this. So for example, on this treadmill, we have examples of 70/30. If we look at this black plastic cover versus the length of this, you can see that it starts about 70/30. We got our 30, 70. If you look at the treadmill panels right here, it's not evenly divided. We have somewhat of a 70/30 here. If you look at the overall size of this thing, it's about 70/30. If you look at this angle here versus this angle here, the silhouette of it, you can see that's 70/30. And then we have a smaller one here. And if you look at this curve, the apex of the curve is 70/30. It's not 50/50 in a semicircle. Same thing here, like this curve is very, it's very dynamic. It's not like this boring half circle. It's got like small, medium, large, small changes. And like the apex of this is actually here. So we still have a very dynamic curve. And the apex is the highest point in the curve. So like if you know racing, you know what the apex of a corner is. But yeah, like try and look for these things. Look for evenness, look for 70/30, break down other people's art and try and critique it like that. Like find the evenness, practice seeing it. And when you can see this stuff easily, which should take a long time, don't just expect to always see it like instantly and recognize it. Like learn to see this a lot. It'll take you a while. And then even if you learn it, you still have to learn how to implement it, which takes even longer. Start 3D block out, do iterations and identify callouts. So like magazine, barrel, whatever, you know, like the main parts of the gun that you need to function. If you want. If you don't, then that's fine. But it'll help inform your design. So practicing design all around you. Start blocking 3D and do iteration and callouts. So I would say that that's a pretty good start. If you want to critique other people's work, go ahead. So cool. I think that wraps up today's extra long class. Somebody asked about posting work. I would say when it comes to posting work, Oris, do you know what format we're going to be using for the class forms?
Yeah, I believe we'll be using Artist Awake again. So let me just put a
I
link
didn't
down
use that one last time, so I actually don't know what that one is yet.
Okay. That's where kind of all the classes have gone, and it's pretty much like Facebook. You can create like an album and call it like week one homework, whatnot, and have students dump their homework into that just to organize it.
Okay.
And Ryan made a bit of a video on how to do it, putting it in correctly with the high res images. So I'll link that in there as well.
Cool. All right, yeah. Also, I don't know how we're going to structure them, but I feel like if every person just made a single thread for their art and talked about it, that would be the best way. And like I said, just kind of closing remarks, like don't feel self-conscious about anything. Like we're all here to learn and we're all here to help each other. Like it's okay if you feel like you're bad or if you feel like you're struggling or even if you're happy with it, like it's a learning process and learning is fun, you know, learning new things. So don't feel self-conscious about your work. Just post it and it's okay. I know that was something I struggled with a lot a long time ago. And yeah, like don't be afraid. The less afraid you are to ask questions, the more you're going to absorb the knowledge. So yeah, anything else? Anybody have any thoughts? Have any questions before we go? No, it's quite a long class.
Yeah, seems like that was a pretty good class, and everyone's raring to go. So I guess we'll
Nice.
keep in touch in Artist Awake, and have a nice week. And for sure, next week we'll be starting at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Sorry for the delay again.
Awesome. Yeah, it's nice to meet everyone. I'll see you next week. Actually, wait.
Uh-huh.
Next week is the ZBrush Summit, so it'll actually be the following week.
Oh, okay.
So everybody has extra time to get their blockouts sorted. Post in the forums though, if you'd like. I will we'll probably get an email out, right, Oris?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna get an email out to everybody and post in the forums, and I'll probably have time to give critique in between classes. So even though we don't have class next weekend, we'll have class on the, is it the 15th? We'll have class on the 15th next, and hopefully you guys will have time to actually address the feedback that I give. So yeah, I'll see you guys on the 15th. And we'll look for that email for the forums.
Okay, cool. And have fun at the summit there.
Yeah. See you guys.